Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started this evening. Welcome to the November 9th Committee of the Whole meeting of the Exeter Township Board of School Directors. Mr. Fike, if you could take the roll call, please.
Allison Wilson.
Here.
Hunter Ahrens. Here. John Fiddler.
Here.
Dr. Ann Herring.
Here.
Dr. David Hemberger. Michael Chupina. Anthony Chowdhury.
Here.
Bree Miller.
Present.
Michelle Stratton.
Here.
8 present, 1 absent.
Thank you very much. I'm just checking. Can everybody in the back hear me okay? Okay, because I know we had issues last time. Okay, before we get started, I would just like to announce that the board met in executive session on Monday, November 1st to discuss personnel personnel item. The meeting minutes are attached. Does anybody have any changes or any discussion they would like to make regarding the October meeting minutes? Okay, we will move on. We will not be amending this agenda tonight. We're going to postpone the recognition, and we are going to move right into the Education Committee. Mr. Fiddler.
Thank you, Allison. We have a long and rich agenda tonight. The first item will be a report from Dr. Miner on the Title I Family Night. Dr. Miner.
Thank you, Mr. Fiddler. This is just a brief item. I wanted to just publicly thank the reading specialist, intervention specialist, Claire McCrae, and all of the families that came to our Title I Family Night from Lorraine and Jackson Wald, as well as Dr. Masser. It was a fantastic night. We had a lot of parents out with their children. They came here to Lausch, and part of Title I is engaging families. And it was really just a joy and a pleasure to see so many of our reading specialists and intervention specialists working with children and their parents to select books and to read those books. So I just wanted to acknowledge them publicly here at the Education Committee meeting. Thank you, Mr. Fiddler.
Thank you, Dr. Miner. Next, we'll hear from Mark Ricketts on internship experiences. Welcome, Mr. Ricketts.
I should know how to operate a microphone. Well, thank you very much. And I just want to first start by saying thank you so much to the board for making my position, my current position, a full-time position as internship facilitator. How many of you knew that we've had an internship program for the last 4 or 5 years? You knew that? Okay, it hasn't very been publicized. I didn't know that we still had one. I knew we had one that the kids would go out to the schools, an educational internship, but I didn't know. And some of our students didn't know that. By making this a full-time position, we're already seeing dividends. We started out with 6 interns in the fall. We got up to 8. I started in August. Next semester, we're already up to 27 interns, up from 14 when I started. I've already gotten that many more. And you can tell that I've been told this over and over from all the other programs that I visited. The key ingredient is the time that they have. Because when you have time, you have relationship building time. I can go out to businesses. Today I went out to Elmcroft, which is now Celebration Vista. Found that she has up to 7 different positions that she's offered for our students. So I had already emailed her, and I didn't know that. But by going there and just having some time to talk, it's just a game changer. So thank you very much for making this a full-time position. There were a couple questions last meeting when I watched the video that I wanted to address real quick. The first one was, how do these credits integrate with the current graduation requirements? And basically, it's just like another elective. Students sign up for it as an elective class. So it's no different than that. And the second question was, how will internships meet district goals? So I took a second, looked at the comprehensive plan. The mission statement, I'll read it real quick, it's short. Empowering every student to become a lifelong learner who is responsible, productive, and engaged citizen within a global community. And already we have, and you're going to hear from 2 of our interns, they're already part of that global community before they graduate. So I can see that is right on track. The vision statement, inspiring and preparing today's learners for tomorrow's opportunities. Again, by letting these students go out into the world of work, they can see all the opportunities, they can get motivated, and they can see what's working and what's not working. We're even maybe saving them money, their parents' money, by letting them go out. I had a roommate who went into education, went through 4 years of college, ended up selling insurance, and that wasn't the same field. Had he gone out and seen, this isn't what I want to do when he was in high school already, he could have gone into insurance in that field without spending that much money. So there's so many different things, and again, I could talk forever. I do want to thank Sandy Blackburn and Aaron Staub, who had run this program before in only, I think, 1 period a day. So they kind of gave me the starting forms and everything so I could kind of hit the ground running, and I've modified those, and I think hopefully improved upon what they've already set forth for me. We're getting more businesses on board. So far, I've gotten 50. Today was my 50th one, so I had to ring a bell for that. 50 businesses, some in Exeter, but a lot not in Exeter, that are willing to accept our interns. And in the past, our students would have to go out, find their own internship. Now they can come to me and say, Mr. Ricketts, I'm trying to look for something in finance. And I can say, oh, I have something at Elmcroft, and send them there, and it's already set up. One girl was going to kind of give up for the spring. She wanted to go into emergency medicine, and they're not letting a lot of interns into hospitals right now. So I did some thinking, and I called someone from Western Ambulance, and she's going to be able to ride along on an ambulance, and that's going to be her internship. And there she'll get emergency medicine when she's going into the military, and so she's going to hit the ground running there. And lastly, so let me make sure. Oh, lastly, one thing that I've done in my new role is help plan our trips to Berks businesses. You probably are aware that we went on a field trip to 9th graders. This was my first time planning or helping to plan a field trip, so I was so grateful for all the great people at the high school and Mr. Campbell for helping me with that. But we went out to 7 different businesses: Arkema, East Penn, Brentag, Newcastle Landscaping, MedEd, Flywinco, and Good Life Companies. And I've heard nothing but glowing reports from that. And just because of this, Arkema has never had any interns there, and I kind of cornered the woman that's in HR, and now we're going to talk about having interns there possibly. So again, it's the people part of it that you have enabled me to do. I'd like to introduce 2 of their great interns, and you're going to hear after you hear from them, you're going to tell that, man, they're doing a great job. The first is Kevin Matos Cruz, and come on up, Kevin. Before I let him talk, I want to let you know that he's already been offered a job this year where he is. He's already been offered an internship if he goes to school for what he's doing. They want him back as an intern for that school. So here's Kevin.
Hey everyone, how is everyone doing? So I started my internship at the Exeter Veterinary, right next to the Exeter Commons, and it's been very enjoyable because I've been looking into going into the veterinary medicine career, and this gave me an opportunity to see what I'm getting myself into, because I've been doing a bunch of research on what it takes to become a vet and everything, but this internship has taught me a lot more. It has given me more of an insight of the career. I've made a lot of friendships with the doctors there, the nurses, everyone there. Even the patients, clients, I've made friendships with all of them. And the doctors themselves have explained to me, how the emotions they go through, how they feel, and just everything. And I've gotten a deeper insight of what it takes to become a vet. And they've also given me advice on how to become a vet. There isn't one step path. There's many ways to get there, and the amount of years in total, it really depends on what I want to do. But it's been a very fun and great experience. I've been able to see surgeries. I've been able to see them putting down animals and how sad those moments are, and how they interact with the patients whose animal is gonna be put down. But it's been very enjoyable. I enjoy every time. I go every single day. Sometimes I even stay after school hours to see a surgery or something because they'll be like, Kevin, there's a surgery coming up at 3. You can stay after, and sometimes I do. But it's been a very great experience. I'm grateful for this opportunity, and it has helped me with planning ahead before leaving high school because they've been telling me what colleges they've gone to, and I've been looking at those colleges and seeing what the application requirements are. And I've been trying to meet those applications because what I want to do is before I leave high school have a set plan, and this internship has given me the opportunity. So thank you.
Kevin, Mark, can I just ask a quick question? Is there a tie-in then with the guidance counselor to assist in, developing a specific sort of approach to either looking at scholarships or applications or that process? Is there that connection made as well?
Right. So I work very closely with, even though I'm not stationed close to them. I got a lot of exercise, which is good in my new role. But yeah, we work together very well. First, the student hands in the packet to me. We discuss kind of their goals, and then it's kind of handed off for a little bit to the guidance counselor who do their part, and then kind of put back on my plate to finalize everything. All right. I'd like to introduce Mckenna Schaefer, and Mckenna, I've known her since I think kindergarten when I taught her in phys ed at Lorraine. So it's kind of cool to see my student grow up to be such a great, and she was a great student when I had her, but just to see her character. And by the way, I hope it's worthwhile. I mean, you guys heard, Kevin, how valuable this is. You guys made that decision to allow this program. So a lot of times you don't get to hear the fun stuff, and I do all the time, and I want you to know that we appreciate what you do. Come on up.
Hi everyone. I'm Mckenna. I'm a part of the internship program, and I am doing my internship at American Eagle, and I go all the way to Philadelphia Premium Outlets for that. And I chose this because I hope to go to college to major in fashion merchandising and then pursue a career in the fashion industry. Through my internship, I've learned many things, which include working closely with all the merchandising managers as well as the corporate for American Eagle. I was given access to all of the training that all the managers were able to, which includes hundreds of videos. The videos that they included had information on things such as visual merchandising, guest experience, trend forecasting, how to manage sales floors, floor set life cycles, and marketing placement and use. For many people, you would have no idea what I'm talking about, but that's the beauty of the internship program. I'm able to learn vocabulary, terms, and processes that I normally would not learn before I go to college. I also gain a lot of hands-on experience. I'm given projects such as redesigning a display, changing fixtures to enhance sales, and even dressing mannequins. Because of the knowledge and experience I learned, I'm able to make executive decisions to benefit the store as a whole, even when the managers aren't there. For example, we had a sweatshirt that was projected to be a top seller in our store, and after studying the data regarding our sales, we learned it wasn't performing well. I came to the realization that because it was folded on a table, it wasn't being shopped as frequently. I made sure that we rearranged the wall around it and added it in to boost our sales. The next week, when we got our weekly data, it was our third best seller. Because of the knowledge I gained early on in my experience, I was able to realize things like that and bring our store much more sales. Being a part of this internship program has taught me so much, from the specifics of my field to the responsibilities and time management skills needed to succeed. Mr. Ricketts has also been an amazing coordinator and teacher and has helped me stay organized and up to date with my work. He spends time coming to our work sites and reading our journals to get an insight into our day-to-day work. We have journals we complete each week to recap our experience and responsibilities of the prior week. These notebooks help us not only retell everything we accomplished, but also hold us accountable at our job sites. Knowing that I have to write a long journal about everything I did helps me accomplish more tasks. Not only have I benefited from this experience, but my brother, who graduated from Exeter in 2020, did as well. He was in the internship program as well, and eventually went to college for what he interned in. He interned at a golf course and ended up going to Virginia Tech to major in turfgrass management and to eventually become a golf course superintendent. Because of the internship program, he was able to work under someone who was in his dream occupation and learned the inside scoop before he was able to commit to it forever. This program is one of the best classes Exeter has to offer and introduces students to the workforce. It not only benefits the individual student, but the community as well. Students are able to work and make money, while small businesses are gaining employees who love for what they do. Again, I'm extremely grateful that Exeter offers such a beneficial class to not only my education, but my life outside of school. After being a part of this program, I feel well prepared and ready for my life after high school and college. Thank you.
And I'm just going to say I'm glad McKenna doesn't want to go into internship facilitator because I think I would lose my job.
Any questions from the board?
Mr. Ricketts, with these journals that the students are keeping, is there any way to sort of repurpose them and share them with future kids who are looking to get into the program as sort of a marketing piece for the program so they can actually see some specifics around what they're working on, what a day looks like? Just to, I mean, it's probably good content if you're having them journal, and I'm just wondering if that would be useful.
Yeah, so what I've planned to do is actually take one of McKenna's and Kevin's, some of the good ones, and then some that might not have as many details, and kind of show them like, hey, this is what I'm looking for. Because as teacher, I know that when you reflect on your work, that's what makes your work better. And by having the students do that, it really helps. So yeah, I'm going to show you these examples. And I'd also like to, with their permission, get a variety of the interns to do a little video clip so I can put a little slides program together. Because it's very powerful to hear it coming from a fellow student. It would be very valuable.
I just have a comment. I'd like to encourage the students to keep internship or co-ops when you go to college. I think that's really going to help you. I was in one of those programs in college. My first job was in a Twinkies factory, and I still can't eat a Twinkie. But my other jobs were at a pharmaceutical company, and that's what my current occupation is. So I would keep that up. Good job.
I agree with Mr. Chaudhry. Definitely continue that when you go to college, an internship program. I was a chemist as well, so mine was drug testing on horses, which is horrible, but that's a whole nother thing. But what I was wondering is that, do you guys get paid for your time and hours that you do? Oh, good. Yes, do you? Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd say the majority, a little bit, slight majority is unpaid, and then the rest are paid. So a little bit more that are unpaid.
So do they get credits, like a number of credits?
Right, so it's credits just like an elective. So they would sign up as an elective, and then you get a credit, or two if they take, 2 blocks.
Okay, good. That's perfect. Thanks.
Other questions from the board? Mark, I just wanted to say that how delighted I am with the program, what you're doing with it. 2 years ago, as a candidate, one way to get familiar with the district, I started reading the Talon. And there was a story in the Talon about the internship program. And the one word I remember in that story was how rare the internships were. Now, that was 2 years ago. Now we're 2 years hence, and you're doing amazing things. So maybe the Talon will come back and talk about how it's not rare anymore. So thank you very much. All right. Third item on the agenda is the 2021 Scholastic 144 exhibition. Dr. Miner, is there anyone here who can talk to that, or shall I just read what's in the agenda?
Dr. Flam?
Thank you. I can share a little
Okay,
bit
great.
about this.
Thanks, Dr.
Mr. Fiddler. Obviously, congratulations are in order for these 3 students, Olivia Bianconi, Bryn Patchell, and Brittany Trung, who had artwork juried at the Shippensburg Scholastic 144 exhibition, and their work will be presented online as well in the near future. So if you'd like to see it, it will be available to see. It's on display at the Kaufman Gallery at Shippensburg now. The Scholastic 144 exhibition, the 144 comes from the fact that 2D artwork must be no greater than 144 square inches, and 3D artwork may be no more than 12 by 12 by 12. So hence the Scholastic 144. But I also want to congratulate Mrs. Pinkerton, who frequently has students competing and entering their artwork, and often they're very successful. So she runs a great program and advocates for her students, and so congratulations all the way around. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Flam. Next on the agenda is Jen Breton with the new district website and Parent Square. Jen?
Hello, can you hear me now? All right, awesome. Give me 1 second here to connect. Hopefully you will see my screen up there in a moment. It's going. Okay, let me get rid of that. Okay. First of all, we'll talk about Parent Square, and we thought that the best thing, because there's not a lot of content in Parent Square because it doesn't go live until Monday, is to show you guys an overview video. This is about 3 minutes long, and then I can answer questions for you, and I can also run back to my seat because I forgot my notes.
Email or text asking you to activate your account. You can also request another activation.
Okay. So that gives you guys a brief overview of Parent Square, but I think once we launch next week, you'll actually see the power of this app. This is going to revolutionize communication, I hope, within this district by making things easier, not only for teachers, administrators, but most of all our parents. For me, coming into this job, I think that most of you, I approach this job straight with 15 years of experience being a parent in the district. I've come in trying to fix the foundation of communication by employing these two new tools, both Parent Square and the new website. And then we're going to build and we're going to flourish upon with using these two tools. Like last year, teachers and administrators we're using Schoology to communicate with our students. Our parents, we're kind of left with, do I check an email? Do I check in Schoology? Do I check on the website? Where do I go? Parent Square from here on out, starting on Monday, will be a one-stop place, a one-stop shop for all of our parents in the district to get information from the school district. They'll be able to get information from their teachers, APT. They'll be able to get information from the district, principals, club leaders, sports leaders, coaches, that sort of thing, and the list is just going to keep growing. Parents will be able to receive alerts from the district, news from teachers, events. They'll be able to sign permission slips. They'll be able to sign up for conferences. They'll be able to have reminders go directly onto their phone, RSVPs, and more. Additional functionality and features can be added once we're up and running as we discuss needs with teachers and administrators, such as integration with and delivery of grades, IEPs, taking payments for yearbooks, etc. So this has got everything that a parent's going to need to know in one central app that people can choose to download or they don't need to download. We're still going to be able to get our messages out to them even if they don't download it starting on Monday. Do you guys have some questions for me about Parent Square?
I do have a quick question. I hope this isn't a place where it's like a Facebook posting.
So yes, in a way. So for a teacher or for a school, it is almost like having a Facebook wall, so to speak. Parents will have the opportunity to comment on posts that parents, teachers, administrators put up. However, it's not going to turn into any sort of crazy situation where other parents are jumping in on it. It is just one-way communication to the author of the post.
Gotcha. Thank you.
What kind of training have we given the staff on use of this?
Absolutely. So just to kind of give you an overall timeline of what has happened so far with Parent Square. We signed the contracts, we hooked up the data, and we had it living on our computers about mid-September. Mid to late September was training for our tech team and sort of setting up our training plan. Early to mid-October, we spent a lot of time adjusting data. Unfortunately, this was not just as simple as plug and play. There were a lot of things that needed to be tweaked, such as we have teachers in multiple buildings. They were connected with one building. They couldn't speak to students in other buildings. We had to pull in periods onto the labels of the classes so that teachers knew which algebra class they were talking to. We had to build bus routes because those have external students that are not in our Skyward system. We had to set permissions for teachers that, they don't fit into a bucket quite as easily. So that was early to mid-October, and I do want to publicly thank Sheldon Martin. He's been phenomenal to work with and very patient, and he's learned it very quickly. Mid to late October, we started training the front office staff, including principals. And in early November during the PD day, I went around and I did training with all the teachers and have continued to go on out as needed, ask questions. I've been posting things to our teachers this week with tips and that sort of thing, and trying to encourage communication from them if they have questions or help. All next week, I plan to pretty much be available, be a support person for both our parents and our staff as we start to work with this. At this point, I have already sent an email to parents with the phone email that this system will use, because I think there's a lot of confusion as to what uses what. And then this week will just be kind of a final training with those who need any additional help or training or anything else like that. On Monday the 15th, we're going to launch. It's going to be exciting. I'm going to send an invite out to all parents. I'm going to have this video ready to go. We're going to have posters. We're going to do lots of tips and that sort of stuff. And I hope that the entire Exeter community is very supportive and gets very excited about it as I am. Again, I just want to thank our amazing tech team who's really been so fantastic to work with this particular product.
So one last question.
Sure.
did we buy like the gold package and now we're gonna have to buy the platinum package later on?
No. We have started, there is really just the additional functionality of being able to integrate in with Skyward for grade delivery and IEPs and possibly add payments. For me, I'm a taxpayer in the district too. I started off with the lowest level package. If we decide that we want to add that functionality, we will. But again, that's not going to be a significant increase in anything at this point. Mm-hmm.
So as far as policy goes, have we established a policy or a process that this is the only tool we're going to use for communication?
That is the directive as of now, yes. That this is what we're going to use. This basically replaces, this is how you communicate to parents. And again, as a parent, you don't need to download the app. You don't, you will still get communication via text. You will still get communication via email. So for those parents who don't want another app on their phone, they will still receive communication from us. The beauty of having the app is you've got one place to go in case you miss something. And it's also got additional functionalities such as the calendar, also having a variety of hub, like resources within the hub that we can build as we see the need.
This is Brenton. In the video, there was a statement that you can join public groups.
Yep.
Can you comment on that? My fear is that I don't want this to turn into other social media platforms.
It's not.
Got it.
First of all, our parents are the ones who have access to this. And when people create groups, for example, some of our high school clubs, they may want to create a group so that other parents can see what's happening within that club so that they can encourage their child to join that club. So as the club creator, you have the option to either list that group publicly, or you can keep it private, where you just invite the people to that particular group. The beauty of it though, like think about sports right now. When we've got a cancellation, like let's say, winter, let's just say in theory that winter had indoor and outdoor sports. Tom has to send out a communication pretty much to everybody saying, this is canceled, this is canceled, this is canceled. This time, if we integrate in our sports into Parent Square, he can direct that communication directly to the parents who would have outdoor sports only.
So what does success look like with this in your eye in terms of communication? What will give you that sense that we've sort of gotten this thing that, is fixing our problems?
Could you ask me in 2 months?
I mean, that's fair. I think, I could answer it myself, but it wouldn't be right. But I think the point is the consolidation of this information into one source. I would imagine that with 4,000 kids in the district, we'd like to see a couple thousand downloads of the app or something like that.
The beauty of this system is that right now it's very difficult to look at any sort of analytics on who's engaging with your content. This has analytics for everything. We'll be able to see, like, if we have a parent who we're like, they just seem very disengaged, we could actually go in and see, like, are they actually reading the message? One of the things I think is really important with this app is that, as we tend to get older, we tend to not think about the generation before us. And most of our young parents are digital natives. This is how they're used to communicating. They're not used to coming home from work after a long day with a bajillion emails and then having to search up 15 other emails from 3 different schools. You get 5 emails from one school a day. 3 kids, you've got 15 emails buried in your inbox. Who wants to do that 6 p.m. at night? So this will consolidate everything into one spot in a way in which our parents are used to communicating.
You mentioned coaches and clubs. Have they been trained on this as well yet?
We haven't gotten to that point yet, but we will shortly. Clubs, yes, because most of them are teachers.
So is Schoology completely dead after a while? Or are we going to shut it down?
So Schoology is for for teachers communicating to students. Parent Square is for teachers, administrators communicating to parents. Two this was one of my main goals this year was let's create a good foundation for how we communicate. I know where to look. My student knows where to look. I know where to look, and let's rock and roll after this.
Other questions from the board? Great, thank you very much, Jen.
Awesome.
I'd like to thank you for putting the work into this, and if you could come back and keep us posted once you get some of those metrics, it would be rather fascinating to see how we're engaging.
Well, I've got a good baseline to start because when I sent out that email to all the parents, 37% were unreachable. That's pretty bad. So, but I do think that a lot of it is because of confusion of how you sign up and how you get information in the district. And I've tried to make it very clear. And this is going to push out to, initially this will push out to all of the contactable ways that we have for that particular person as opposed to a family. So you'd be considered one person, your wife would be considered another person, step parent would be considered another person on both sides. We have the ability to reach up to 4 different people through text and email, as well as the app. It's much more robust.
So when you say unreachable, do you mean they had a bad email address or a bad
Yes.
phone number in there? Okay.
Yep.
So is there going to be some way to say, hey, folks,
Yep, I'm going to be working on that.
Okay.
Really rich analytics, like would make you, if you're a data person, you'd love it. I love data, so. All right, so I'm going to move on to the new website. So as I said, really some of the things that I was attempting to do when I started my position were to fix some foundational things. And I think that in the district, our website for a long time had been serving a big multi-purpose function. It was communicating with students, it was communicating with staff, it was communicating with our community, and it was communicating with parents. This time I've tried to make, all right, we've got Schoology like drilled down, like our teachers are fabulous with Schoology. They know how to communicate with students that way. That's how they're going to continue to do that. Parent Square will be a new tool, and this will be a new tool for both our parents and our community. So just to kind of take you through a tour of the splash page, we've got some photos on the front. And now we've got a very news-centric type of interface. If you've been paying attention to the social media I've been putting out, you may have noticed that I haven't really been using Twitter a lot because I don't have any place to link it back, and most of my stories are more than, I don't know how many characters you're allowed on Twitter, but way fewer than what I have ability to do. So this will allow me to basically blog, so to speak, and get news out to our community, and also send out through Twitter with a short link so that people can come back here to actually see the news. So this is going to be updated very regularly, daily, and everything will be compiled on the district site, and then it shoots out to the respective school site as well. After that, there are quick links. I pulled data from our current site to see where our parents were going and where our community. Can you hear me now? Okay. There's also a calendar. I think that this is on.
I'm glad they're Duracell. It's good batteries.
Thank you, Joe. All right, can you guys hear me okay? All right, awesome. All right, I also want to pull your attention to this up here. This is how we're going to navigate to the different schools. Menu here that you're going to see across the top is actually very consistent with the remaining menus. However, the menus that are on the individual school sites are actually going to be all consistent throughout the entire district, because I do think that that's something that we're lacking right now. So hopefully somebody's journey as a K through 4 student, they will know exactly where they need to go to find certain information as they progress up through the different schools in the district. So just some things that I wanted to pull your attention to on the district site. I've tried to make this a little bit more community focused. So we do have a very robust community tab here. One of the things that I've added in also is an Exeter Grapevine tab. This will allow people within the community to ask us questions, and we can post a reply right on the site. This can be anonymous if they so choose. We also have our COVID-19 dashboard, of course. You'll also see over here, I inserted a community bulletin board. This is for our library. I already have something here, actually. So right now, this would enable any organization that has a similar mission to us, and the event or the registration is mostly geared towards Exeter students. So in other words, we're not going to necessarily put up something here that would be for 25-year-old students. This is going to be, aimed towards our kids. But like sports registrations for youth sports, where they're not necessarily connected with the school district, but it would allow us to have a place to actually keep all of these things. A lot of districts use Peach Jar, which I'm sure that some of you may have heard of, to distribute flyers from third-party organizations. I decided rather than bring on another expense, we could just do it right through here. Let me see if there's anything else I really wanted to, and another thing I wanted to show you too is that I've moved most of our, oops, that's going to take you out to there, so hang on a second, sorry. I've moved anything that has external, additional links. I've put them all at the top so that people know that they have other options to look at on the particular page before they actually delve into the information. Statistics show, this is gonna blow your mind. You would think that you have 2 minutes, maybe 4 minutes to actually get somebody's attention when they get on a web page. It's 15 seconds. 15 seconds to get the information. So you'll see that throughout the entire site, I've tried to make things short, quick, easy. Click here if you need more information. On the individual school sites, I am very excited to show you guys this. This right here was custom built. We are probably the only school district in the entire country that has this. I asked for this to be developed with the company that I worked with because, especially for us, we have a very confusing cycle. So this is something I can pre-program prior to the school year. I can put in all of the holidays, and it will skip over those days. It'll actually say today's a holiday, we're closed. In the summer, it turns off, and parents will no longer, here, I'm going to go to Rifton real quick. So you can see that's a 4-day cycle. So parents are going to be able to figure out which day of the week it is much quicker and easier now. As you can see on the senior high page, very similar to what you just saw. This news is specific to the high school. Same links, same calendar. This will actually be drilled down just to them. I haven't gotten to that yet, and the social media as well. This menu that is right up here is going to be exactly the same throughout the entire, all the other schools, throughout K through 4, Riften, everything. One other thing I just want to show you real quick is a very nice directory that this flies out from the side. If you click on here, you can email. If not, the phone number's up here. You can click here for a searchable directory, but I have it broken down into department. So in case you're like, oh, I can't remember exactly who it was, hopefully you can remember the department and who you need to contact just by looking through here. Or they'll also be in Parent Square. Let me just take you on to one of the elementary sites. This directory at the elementary level looks similar, except we've got kindergarten and broken down into grades. And I'm going to go back to the high school real quick. I've also tried to take some information that I felt was kind of buried in booklets and that sort of thing. So for example, the Soaring Eagle is a very long document, and if you're a parent, you might not feel like you can sit down and read all 50 pages of it. So I've tried to break this down into department. We'll start off with the faculty so that you can see a picture of them. These people I don't have pictures of, obviously, with contact information through their email right here, and then all the course descriptions down below so that parents can actually see what courses are available to their students. On most of the pages, I've also tried to include FAQs where I felt that they were appropriate. So just to kind of go over a timeline of things with you on this, there's a couple of pages that I need to just finish up and tweak the rest of this week. Next week, I'll be sending this out for a hard review. We'll get feedback, changes, that sort of thing, and I'll make those over the course of the next 2 weeks. I was hoping to launch this at the same time as Parent Square. I did feel like it would be much better to actually launch them separately just because I'm going to have Parent Square information on our website, and in case something doesn't work right, I want there to be a little bit of a gap. The other thing is too, is that when you do change so we're going to actually change and don't freak out about this, but we are going to change our web address from the www.exeter.k12.pa.us is going to now change to exetersd.org. However, the K-12 will still work. Okay, so you can type in either, all of the links and stuff will still work. So when you do that, you get, it's called a DNS change, and your site could be down for a maximum of about 12-ish hours. So we're planning to change this, I believe the Friday after Thanksgiving, because I don't think that there will be too many people that are looking for the website at that particular day. It'll also give me Monday after we get back from vacation to just make sure everything's working perfectly and make sure that it's all good. And that's about it. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free.
Amazing. I love it. This website is beautiful.
Thank you.
We're so lucky to have you.
Thank you.
You did a wonderful job. The directory part sold me right away because I'm on there all the time and it was so frustrating. So this looks so easy. I love it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. I'm sorry, for board docs? Absolutely. So we'll go up to district homes. If you head back, Board of Directors is right here. You guys are all down here. And as I said, all of the links and stuff I've put right up at the top so that you know that they're there before you even delve into the information. So if you want to go to Board Docs, you would go right there. I'll take you right out there.
Other questions?
Do the teachers, I know there were images of the teachers there, but do the teachers each have a page? Like on the previous website, they had a page with their picture and it told you a little bit about them. Is that still there?
No, I decided that I think that it would be best for our district to portray itself on the website with consistency. And to date, that really hadn't been happening. We had some teachers who were putting together very elaborate and very awesome pages, and we had other teachers who just didn't tech. They just preferred not to. So they had, very minimal information. So I asked the teachers, I announced to the teachers over the summer that I was planning to make this change and not to make any updates for this year, and that they could put all that information into Schoology. So teachers will now have the opportunity to also move that information into Parent Square if they so want. My plan is that this is a great framework. If we decide that we want to start adding some consistent data about our teachers and that sort of thing, maybe a brief bio that is not too much work for them. I don't want to give them another thing to do this year. We can definitely add to it.
I only ask, I don't want to make more work for anybody either. I know, like, at the beginning in August, when we're told who our kid's teacher is, at least for elementary level or Brighton as well, I always went online and would show my kids, this is what your teacher looks like. So, like, we couldn't go to meet the teacher this year. So when he showed up the first day, he had no idea. He had a brand new teacher. I was, it was nice. Well, this year it didn't work because they didn't update it, but it was always nice that they could go on and see who their teacher was. So I liked at least a picture, even if there was no other information.
I agree, and I intend, if I can't get all of their pictures and stuff, I will get out and make sure that by the end of the school year, if not sooner, we would have pictures of all of our teachers. I do also, I know that as a parent, I know that a lot of kids, particularly at your kids' grade level in Rifton, that they are mostly interested in who's on what team. So as you can see, I've also broken them down into teams so that when parents are asking who's on team A, they're right here and they're done.
And speaking of pictures, by the way, you take beautiful pictures.
Thank you.
I don't know that all of those were yours, but I liked your homecoming pictures. I saw that you did. You do a very nice job.
Thank you.
Last call for questions. Great, Jen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, the next item on the agenda is a report on quarantines. Mrs. Harris and Dr. Flanagan.
Before we get started, can I just remind everyone in the room that we need to wear masks inside the school building? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fiddler. So Mr. Ricketts got to talk to you about our awesome internship program. Mrs. Breton got to talk to you about our awesome website. And now I get to talk to you about quarantining. So here we go. Mr. Way, if you could put us to the beginning slide. The second slide is good. Thank you. So before I start any conversation about quarantine and what our current practices are and what's happening in the county, I just do want to clarify some language to make sure that everybody's on the same page. We're all talking about the same things in this conversation. So first of all, we're going to be talking about quarantining, which is the process that happens when someone's identified as a close contact of a positive individual. That's different than isolation, which is the process that we do for individuals who are indeed positive, okay? So the conversation tonight will be about the quarantine piece. The other thing I wanted to clarify for the board is what is actually a mandate from the state right now for school districts, and what are recommendations or guidelines? Because I think a lot of times that gets lost in the mix of the conversation as well. And so moving forward, I want to make sure everybody's clear on that. So masking, as you know, is a mandate right now. Over the summer, it was something that was left to local control. And then Governor Wolf sort of walked that back along with DOH. They executed the mask mandate. And then if you heard the news yesterday, Governor Wolf came out and announced that tentatively in January, he is going to return that control over masking decisions to local school boards. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. But right now, that's a mandate. The other mandates that we have are to report positive cases that are reported to us to DOH weekly via a portal that the nurses use to report that to DOH. And along with the positive cases, they're also asked to report who we've identified as close contacts of those positive cases. Interesting thing to note about that process, we used to report them daily. So when we would get a case, DOH would ask us to do the line list right away and report to them. They've moved to this system as of October 15th, of where we only report them weekly on a Friday and upload our information to them on a Friday. So they're not doing much in the way of real-time contact tracing or anything like that with those cases. It's more data collection at this point. And then, of course, the other mandate is to exclude positive cases, and that's that isolation piece that I mentioned earlier. The practices that we engage in regarding quarantining are recommendations or guidelines for school districts. So in theory, that means that you have a choice about whether or not you're following those guidelines or recommendations. At the beginning of the pandemic, of course, all districts followed those quarantining recommendations and guidelines. And I'll give you a summary of what's happening right now in the county with regard to what folks are doing. But generally speaking, what has been happening in the county up until now is that folks have been following the recommended quarantining guidelines. Next slide. So when I talk about those guidelines, what are they? Well, they've asked us in those guidelines to identify positive cases, and of course, you know they're reported to us through a variety of different ways. To identify the close contacts of that case, and exclude the close contacts from school, and notify the families of the close contact and possible exposure. Next slide. So who actually needs to quarantine out of those close contacts? Any individual who's not fully vaccinated against COVID and, of course, has been identified as a close contact. Next slide. A close contact, just as a refresher for you, is someone who's been in contact with a positive individual closer than 6 feet for 15 minutes or longer, within 2 days of symptom onset, or, of course, if the person didn't have symptoms, 2 days of when they had their test. The carve-out to that is what we discussed at the beginning of the school year, which was a significant addition to the quarantining recommendations for this school year, and that is students who are within 3 to 6 feet of each other and are masked do not need to quarantine, and of course that excludes teachers, staff, and other adults in that definition. Next slide. And per the guidelines, the lengths of quarantine are as follows. For a non-household exposure, it's a 10-day quarantine with the option to return after day 7 if you have a test day 5 or later and are symptom-free. Interestingly, all of the guidance from CDC and DOH still indicates that a 14-day quarantine is the safest quarantine, but I can tell you with certainty that the 10-day and the 7-day option are the ones that are truly exercised in school districts across the county. I don't think there's anyone who's even offering a 14-day quarantine at this point. And then, of course, the most problematic quarantine timeline is the one that involves household exposure to a positive. And that's a 20-day quarantine because the individual that's positive is in isolation for 10 days. And then after that person's isolation period is over, the household contacts have to quarantine for 10 days. I say it's problematic because, of course, that's a long time for students to be out of school. And unanimously, in talking to my colleagues across the county, that is the one that everyone struggles with the most. Next slide. So speaking of my colleagues in the county, I will just take a moment to say that my colleagues in discussion are interested in our conversation tonight because you're having this conversation in a very transparent way with the community. And for a lot of my colleagues, that hasn't necessarily been the opportunity that's been presented. And in conversations with my colleagues for the past year and a half, they have struggled with quarantining and with quarantining practices and the implications of those practices in terms of instruction for students. And so I heard back from about a dozen districts in the county. I didn't summarize here point for point which district is doing what, and I did that out of respect for my colleagues. Because for some of them, as I said, those conversations haven't occurred in this kind of forum. It's been more of an informal way of saying, we're just going to decide we're not going to do this anymore. Let's just kind of phase this part out of the guidance, that kind of conversation. Additionally, some folks have said, well, our official answer is we're following the guidelines. And then they've said off the record, but we're kind of doing this, or we're kind of massaging this part of the guidance. So, out of respect for them, you'll see that I've simply indicated that across the county, some districts are following guidelines, and that's what they've indicated, and that's that, right? The same way that we are. Some have indicated that they're not following the guidelines. So out of those dozen that I heard back from, there are 3 districts who are no longer quarantining or are in the process of stopping quarantining. Okay. Again, because it's recommended, it's not mandated, so that they do have that choice to do that. And then some indicated, yep, we're following the guidelines, and then followed up with, but we're not quite following this part, or we're flexing this part of the guidance. So some districts are, simply looking at lunch quarantines. Some districts are focusing on the household positives more so. It's kind of all over the map. And I think it ended up being all over the map just over the last few weeks. This conversation the board requested tonight, but it's also kind of an organic conversation that's happening out in different communities. That's in tandem with, Mr. White, if you go to the next slide. That's in tandem with the availability of vaccinations now for students ages 5 through 11. So you'll see that Mrs. Breton and I pushed out communication on Friday and on Monday to families to let them know of the availability of vaccinations for children ages 5 to 11. And Dr. Miner is working with Walmart again to get a clinic set up to be able to offer those vaccinations for families who are interested. So with that in play, that is really bringing to light this conversation about quarantining practices. Next slide. So moving forward as a board, you have, the option to ask us to continue to follow the DOH guidelines as we have been, knowing as well that there's the opportunity for families to get their children vaccinated. And if you get vaccinated, you don't have to quarantine, as the guidance is currently written. Or the board could decide that you don't want to continue quarantining practices, and you could create a voting item to address that issue related to our health and safety plan, because our health and safety plan right now is written as such that it says that we'll follow the guidelines, right? So you might want to rewrite that to say that we'll follow the mandates if you're interested in doing a voting item on that. You may wish also to parlay this to the new board coming in, as a discussion for December instead. But that's, it's really, I think, a discussion that's timely and that I think other districts are eager to have. And I think that it's a good thing for you to have this discussion in this way, in this forum. I will take advantage of the fact that I have the mic for a few minutes and just share some additional information about quarantining with you that might help guide your thinking on this. In looking at our data, over 90% of the students that we put into quarantine remain negative. So that means that out of all of those students that were quarantining, very, 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 very few actually turned positive as a result of being a close contact in school. I think that's pretty significant. Additionally, you might not immediately make the connection, but we are seeing a spike in mental health referrals, not just here in Exeter, that is across the nation, but certainly in talking to my colleagues in the county, all over the county as well. There are staffing shortages in mental health treatment centers, so we're having to put our students who need help in partial programs. in order to be able to get that help. We have an increase in student drug use that we've been addressing since the start of the school year. Students are self-medicating. And I don't know if you've been following the news, with regard to education news across the nation, but there's been an increase in school violence across the nation. I was reading an article in Education Week last week, about that. And so all of that tells me how important it is for our students to be here with us all the time in person. And again, I'm not necessarily making any recommendation to the board tonight. We haven't discussed anything with the pandemic task force. This was simply just to kind of give you an update on where we're at in relation to other districts in the county. But I did want to give you those sort of thinking points to think about as you move forward with this conversation.
Don, I just have one follow-up question right now. Out of the 10% that do not show symptoms at any time while they're in quarantine, do all 10% of them test positive at some point, or do we just not hear back or find out additional information?
No, those families are taking them for a test, and then they're reporting back to us that their child is positive. In some cases, they have symptoms as well, and so that kind of coincides. In other cases, some of them are asymptomatic, and they just know because they got the test. It's kind of a mix.
Dawn, are we tracking the kids that are getting vaccinated?
We are not. We have not requested that families turn in vaccinations to us. What we do is if you are identified as a close contact and our nurse has to call you to say you've been identified as a close contact, part of that conversation is your child vaccinated? And if your child is vaccinated, please show us proof so that you don't have to quarantine.
I have a couple of questions. And some of this comes out of a discussion that Allison and I had with some people who spoke at the last school board meeting. I think Dr. McCormick is here somewhere. So one of the questions, because I asked for this item to be put on the agenda because I wanted to talk a little bit about how the work associated with quarantine is being handled, because there seems to be a sort of fluctuation in how the work is sent home. Some students are challenged, others aren't, and I think there's a big concern about whether or not we're meeting some of our educational sort of objectives if we're putting people into quarantine for 7, 14, 20 days. So I don't know, Dr. Phlam, if that's your issue.
I was going to say, there's a second part to this presentation. I just paused to answer any technical questions about quarantine, but Dr. Phlam is going to address what we do for instruction during quarantine.
Do you know what the other schools, I don't know if you can answer this, that are not requiring the quarantine anymore? Are they having parents sign waivers?
No.
Or, okay.
Because it's recommended and not mandated, there's really no process for that. The one thing that I would consider, if that becomes a conversation with the board, is that I do think it's important for families to still know if their child's been a close contact. And so I would offer up that idea that if we go down that route at some point, that we make sure that we're still informing families that their child's been a close contact. And then, of course, that leaves the choice to the family, too, if they want to quarantine. And I'm sure we have families who will want to do that. We'll allow them to choose to do that, right? That would be my
Thank you.
thought.
That was my next question for you, so I appreciate that. And I lost track of what my next question was going to be.
It's okay.
But it'll come back to me.
Okay.
Mrs. Harris, you mentioned lunch quarantine. Are you able to collect data as to where the positive case occurred, whether it was in the classroom or at lunch?
Yeah. Generally speaking, we are able to identify, if the student was exposed based on where they were sitting at lunch or based on where they were sitting in classroom. In some cases, it's fuzzy, and also in some cases, it appears to be the result of a close contact in school because we've identified them as a close contact. But it could also be because they were at a birthday party together this weekend and they're friends outside of school. So we only have that data in front of us to be able to look at, and we're saying it is very likely that that person turned positive because they're in quarantine because they were a close contact. But the reality exists that many of these students are also continue to be close contacts outside of school as well.
Do we have a snapshot right now of how many kids are out in quarantines?
I
right
would
now?
have to add up the numbers for you. I have it on the spreadsheet, but I can get that for you.
I did remember what I wanted to say. I just wanted us to state strongly that we're not talking about positive cases.
Right. We're not
We're not
talking
talking
about
about-
isolation.
We're not talking about
Correct.
symptomatic students.
Correct.
We're talking about kids that possibly were exposed.
You got it. Yep. Isolation and quarantine, two different topics.
Mrs. Harris, I have a question. How does this impact when a student is immunized or vaccinated? I mean, does the quarantine process continue as you described, or is it different under those conditions?
So when a student is fully vaccinated, they do not need to quarantine. That's the current CDC and DOH guidance. The guidance actually uses the word individual. So I actually reached out to the IU when the information came out about children ages 5 to 11 being able to be vaccinated, just to double check to make sure that that language did apply to students age 5 to 11. It has applied to our students age 12 and up. And they reached out to DOH, who confirmed that that term individual means anybody who's vaccinated.
Dawn, did any of your colleagues from those 3 districts that are not quarantining share any anecdotal concerns or any data concerns that they had after doing that?
No, I appreciate your question, and I think that's probably something that you would think about in having this discussion. Is that going to increase the rate of positivity in the community? Is that going to increase the incidence rate? I will tell you, interestingly, so I religiously follow the incidence rates on Mainline Mama as part of my job now, right? And the incidence rates in 2 of those 3 communities are currently lower than the incidence rate here in Exeter.
Does that have anything to do with the characteristics of the school district, such as being rural versus suburban?
I think it has to do with a lot of things. It also has to do with the idea of vaccination and who in the community is vaccinated versus who is not. It has to do with transiency in the community and who's working in the community versus working out, the level of exposure, all those kinds of things. There's a huge variety of factors.
Dawn, I have a question. I don't know if you can answer or to refer it. What kind of legal exposure does a school district have if, like these 3 school districts, I see we have Sean here with us tonight, for either one of you, what, if any, legal exposure is there if the district says, nope, we're not going to do that anymore?
Yeah, I actually spoke to one of our solicitors at Sweet Stevens, Katz and Williamson, and covered all of our bases. But again, it goes back to that idea that it's recommended. So if a student next to me has the flu, and 2 weeks from now I have the flu, there's no responsibility on the district in any way related to that. The masking mandate is a different conversation. And again, that's, it's kind of taking it back to the beginning of my part of this presentation. You're going to have to discuss masking again, folks, because Governor Wolf is turning that control back to you. So I think that's also part of the bigger consideration. So you're thinking about vaccinations and the availability of those to our community. You're thinking about the overall process of quarantining, right? And some of that data that I shared with you regarding the number of students who are actually coming back positive, out of quarantining. But then you're also thinking about that masking conversation.
And Mrs. Harris, I'd just like to add on to that in terms of the consideration. So what the governor is actually doing is that they're letting the current masking mandate expire because it expires in January. And so, if the board were to take up a motion next voting meeting in December when we have our new board members seated that change the health and safety plan from we'll follow the guidance to we'll follow the mandates, the board would not actually have to reconsider masking in January because it would no longer be a mandate at that point. So that single change to say we're going to follow the mandates, not the recommendations, would negate a necessity to have that conversation in January. If the board would say we're going to continue to follow the guidance, then they would need to revisit the masking question when that expires.
Okay.
Can you clarify for me, is this a motion that can be made today, or is this a motion that would have to be made at the next voting meeting?
Yes, this is not a voting meeting today, and so it's not an item that can be on the agenda. So part of what happens at a meeting like this is the board can certainly talk about whether or not they'd like to move it to the voting meeting. Typically, Mrs. Wilson at the end, affirms that the following items will be moved on to the voting meeting. And I do think that it is a reasonable point of discussion for the board to either say, yes, we want to tackle this at the next voting meeting next Tuesday because we want to change this in short order, or we recognize that there was just an election, there's 4 new board members coming on, we would like those 4 board members, because they'll ultimately own whatever happens with this, to have a say in that. Then theoretically the board could have a special voting meeting on that December evening, where we usually would have the committee of the whole to expedite it or wait, or the board could choose not to move this forward, at all, and just leave the plan as it is.
And I thank you. And I understand we have a lot more to hear and move forward with this, but personally, where I'm at now, I don't want our kids to have to wait another month or so. So I personally would like to see this moved on to the next meeting, but I know we do have another presentation.
I agree with Ann. The one thing that I would just list as a caveat is, if there's only 5 members of the board who would support suspending quarantining indefinitely, I prefer to wait until the new board is seated, because I think don't want to take votes like that right before they could potentially change that decision. But if there's a strong majority for quarantining to be suspended, then I would certainly support that at this point. The other caveat that I would add is I don't want our decision to change the language in a way that takes the decision out of the hands of the new board on masking. I think that's really going to be something that the new board has to look at closer to the time when that order changes.
I'd just like to offer a point of clarification, Mr. Ahrens. So if the board would amend the health and safety plan to say that we will follow the mandates, not the guidance, then the board would not have to take up masking. It would expire on its own. However, if the board wished to, we are still permitted, and the governor's made that clear, when the mandate expires, to enforce it independently. So the board could have another motion to reinstate masking in the health and safety plan for a particular period of time or some other data point. So it wouldn't take a future board's ability to maintain masking after the expiration away from them. It would simply not force them to decide it if they didn't choose to bring it up separately.
I see what you're saying, and I understand that it's basically the same thing, but in my mind of how I would wave a magic wand and do all this, I think it would be more appropriate for the board to have to be forced to take that decision, the next board to be forced to take that decision, rather than for us to kind of make it for them, honestly.
I just wanted to offer the clarification.
Ms. Harris, when you talk about other districts and the fact that they have modified the guidelines for quarantine, can I assume, am I correct in assuming that in most cases the modification has to do with the number of days?
No.
No, it's not.
No, actually, it's not. That's one of the things that's actually pretty consistent across the county. Those informal conversations around what they may have modified may be, well, kids are all masked, so we're really looking at the 3 to 6 feet. We're not so worried about the 1 to 3 feet, which is the part of the guidelines. That's where it's actually recommended to quarantine. So it's more of what they're emphasizing, what they're able to focus on. In some instances, it's, having the staff to manage quarantining and things like that. So again, those are the more informal parts of those conversations.
So are you saying that there are some districts that don't have a quarantine mandate at all in their district? In other words, if a student is exposed, that
Yes,
doesn't
that's
have any
what I'm
impact
saying.
upon their attendance?
That's what I'm saying. There are a couple of districts in the county that they are not practicing this process of telling a family that their child needs to stay home for 10 days or 7, or the 7 with the test after day 5. They are simply letting them know your child was a close contact. Feel free to self-quarantine if you'd like to do that process. If you feel that that's safe for your family, we'll report it to DOH, and that's it.
And what's, I don't know if you can say with any degree of consensus among your administrative team or staff, but what's sort of the general feeling among the Exeter folks who are really the beneficiaries of this guideline?
Yeah. So when we talk about families, I think as a group, we've all heard from families on both sides of this issue, right? So I get an equal amount of emails concerned that, we're not doing enough measures to keep students safe, and then I get lots of emails saying that these quarantining practices are not needed and they're not beneficial for students. I haven't gotten a chance to talk to all of my nurses yet, but I've talked to several of them. And the ones that I have talked to have indicated that they are not seeing great benefit out of the quarantining practice because they're looking at the same data that I'm looking at on those quarantining and positive sheets and data tracking tools that we use, where we see that not a lot of students are turning positive during quarantine. So, for their end of things, they're working through this process and there's not a lot of return in terms of, oh, look, all of these students turned positive as a result of this quarantine. It's a really, beneficial practice. In talking with some of our administrators, again, I haven't had an opportunity to talk to the whole admin team, but I've talked to several of them. We also haven't talked to the pandemic task force because I don't think we're necessarily making recommendations tonight. We're really just kind of giving you a state of affairs tonight. But the members of the admin team that I've spoken to feel the same way. We all, I think, have a fervent desire for students to be here
Mrs.
all
Harris,
the time.
can I just add, a thought to Dr. Hemberger? When we were first dealing with the pandemic and, people were kind of in lockdown, that sort of thing, you could hope maybe that if you quarantined a student, they weren't going and playing sports and going to, and I think that time has passed, realistically. So, we're not letting a child come to school. We don't have any authority. And I think in a lot of cases, there are parents who they don't send their kid to school, but they still send them to youth sports and they still send them to birthday parties and they still send them to Sunday school. And so, I think part of the calculus has to be, is there any reasonable expectation that when we exclude them from school, they're then also not engaging in every other contact with our same students, right? Because they're the same students who are in youth sports and at Sunday school and all those other things. So I think that is one of the things that's tough. And I think parents fairly say, okay, fine, so you don't let my kid come to school now, but I know Johnny isn't coming to school because he's quarantined, but I just saw him at 5 events in the community with my kids. So I just think it's hard to collect real data on that, but anecdotally, I think everybody's out and about and living their lives now. So to think that every kid that we quarantine isn't exposing other kids informally is probably unrealistic.
Yeah.
Which is why I said in the beginning of the presentation, this is kind of an organic conversation. I mean, Mr. Jupina, you did request a report, but in the same time, it's also an organic conversation happening as a result of changes that are happening, within the community at large and in general with the pandemic.
And I'm assuming too, Dawn, that the Department of Health is not maintaining any data on quarantining, non-quarantining school districts and judging the efficacy of that process, based upon the actual,
No, and as I mentioned, I mean, I've shared this with you previously in conversations about all of these processes and working with the DOH. I think the DOH has been very collaborative in the sense that they've helped to put together a set of guidelines for school districts and help to reinforce those guidelines. But they haven't been actively involved in helping us contact trace or calling families to help us with those quarantining procedures. That really is falling solely on our nursing staff, and then of course with support from the principals in that process as well, particularly around the conversation of instruction during quarantine, which Dr. Flynn will talk about. So the data that we report to DOH right now, back to the beginning, is that we're reporting weekly positive cases that are reported to us. And then we're reporting to them via a line list who the close contacts that we've identified in school are of that positive case.
Dr. Ryan, I'm going to circle back to the mask mandate. If the mask mandate passes and the board's okay with it, will the parents still have option to send their kids in with mask, or district will say no mask in the buildings?
No, I again, unless the board would for some reason want us to say that, we would not say that. So for instance, in the summer, there was a period of time where the mask mandate wasn't in place, and we had families who sent their kids with masks. And actually, one of the things that I think we were really pleased to find is that there were young kids. You know, it was our elementary summer camp, that we didn't see teasing, we didn't see bullying, either that you're not wearing a mask or you are wearing a mask. Our children were extremely well behaved and respectful of whatever the choices families made regarding that would be. So in the event that the mask mandate would expire and then the board would choose not to enforce it independently, families would be absolutely welcome to continue to send their child into school with a mask.
Any other questions for Mrs. Harris? Okay, Dr. Flam, you're on.
Thank you. Mr. Jupina, to address your question and to follow up on Mrs. Harris's presentation, I'll talk about the academics and support when students are quarantined. And I'll talk about that first K-6 and then 7-12, because though we're using a similar approach K-12, there are some subtle differences between the two. And then when I'm finished talking about what we're doing and why, if I know we have a number of our principals with us, maybe they would like to share some of the specifics about feedback they've gotten or conversations they've had. So for K-6 students, they're getting their schoolwork from their teachers, whether that's digitally or in hard copy format, and their teachers communicating with the students and their parents. Principals are also communicating with families to gauge the level of support necessary and to make recommendations for tutoring if necessary. So we do have a tutor in place for K-6 students, available after school with the frequency determined by the tutor. And what I mean by that is the tutor generally sets up sessions for grade levels. So I'm going to meet with first grade students at this time, third grade students at this time, second grade students, and so forth. But then if there's an additional need for support, then that time is scheduled with individual students as well. So that tutoring session is available both in a group format and as in addition, an individual format. At the 7-12 level, students who are quarantined are working with their teachers and receiving their assignments via Schoology. And principals are communicating with students and families to set the expectations for the students and to communicate how students should contact their teachers and how they should set up Google Meet sessions if they'd like to, in lieu of that tutoring that's taking place at the elementary level. Those Google Meet sessions could take place after school, or they could take place during a time that the teacher's available if that time is necessary. And throughout the district, all parents are encouraged to contact their child's school counselor if their child is struggling or needs more general support. So, in addition to the academic support provided by the teachers and the tutor, then if the students need more general support, certainly we're encouraging them to reach out to the counselors as well. Next slide, please, Jeff. So, rationale for why we're using this approach is that, unlike last year, teachers are much more mobile. They have established classroom routines, and they're not confined to their desk as they were last year, like in front of their computers, as they were for the majority of the year last year. They're moving around the classroom. They're in guided reading groups. They're working with individual students. They're all about the classroom. And so they've established these routines. There are more students in the classrooms compared with last year. And obviously the quarantine guidelines have changed from last year as well. We're shooting for 6 feet last year and 3 feet this year. So that's a difference as well. So, and as we are moving forward with this, we're getting much better at addressing student needs. Our tutor is now in place, functioning as we like her to. And so I think we're getting better as time passes with how we're supporting our students. So for those reasons, we feel that this is the best option for Exeter at this time. and hopefully the number of quarantine students I just noted there will be reduced when vaccinations become available, or certainly if the board goes in a different direction. So that, in general, is how we're addressing students' academics and the supports. And again, if our building principals would like to speak in more specifics, or if you have questions about more specifics, I'm sure they would be happy to address your questions, and I certainly will.
So just following up, Dr. Flaman, thank you, Don, for your presentation. So in my conversations that I've had with some folks, including Dr. McCormick, and I'm sure she could probably address this at the end better than I'm going to do it, but I think there is some concern that the work that was sent home is not at the same level as what the child will be learning in the classroom. And there was also a question about whether or not we're able to execute properly on those students that have IEPs. So I wonder if we could address both of those issues in this quarantine setup.
Well, I would say in general terms that if parents are having concerns about that they should reach out to their child's teacher immediately and the child's principal to share those concerns and have those concerns addressed. With regard to students with IEPs, certainly the special ed case managers would be a contact along with the teacher to share those concerns and make sure that they're addressed. If they're not feeling as though those concerns were addressed, then to certainly follow up with the principal or the special education supervisors is the next step. But I think the first step is to contact the teacher, share those concerns, contact the principal, share the concerns, and if you're not satisfied, move forward to make sure that those concerns are heard and addressed.
What is the rationale behind having the tutor in the evening? Fortunately, my children have not been quarantined, so I haven't had to experience this, but I would think that if my kids were, they would be doing their work during normal school hours. I would also assume, although I don't know again because I haven't experienced this, that the work that they're being given is not 6-7 hours worth of work like they're in school. So I'm thinking if they're working on something and they need help, I wouldn't want my kids to have to wait until 3-4 o'clock for a tutor. So if you can maybe explain a little bit about that.
Well, the reason for that is because our tutor is one of our teachers who's working during the day and helping students after school. And so that's really the rationale for that. And we have a limited amount of time.
I would just elaborate on that, Mrs. Stratton. As I think the board is very well aware at this point, there is a sub shortage everywhere. We actually had a very interesting presentation this morning at the intermediate unit. Dr. Hamburger, I don't know if you were maybe on the video for that, but and maybe you can correct me if I quote this incorrectly, but that typically Pennsylvania colleges were putting out 40,000 teachers a year, and now they're putting out less than 14,000. And so there really is an insufficient number of substitute teachers. And to have a teacher dedicated to tutoring during the day, that's probably a teacher that we actually need in our buildings, covering our classrooms so that our students aren't missing special, etc. So, I think if we had plenty of substitutes and we didn't have during the day coverage, would we have a tutor during the day? I think, obviously that makes a lot of sense. But given the fact that, anytime we have an available person, we really need them to be covering a classroom so that we're not having teachers miss planned periods and students miss specials. That's one piece of that. And then the other piece was, of course, to have one of our own teachers who has expertise in the curriculum, who has the ability to connect with teachers at other grade levels, that sort of thing, so that the quality of the support, even though the time may not always be ideal, is a higher level of quality of support. And that teacher has the ability to, be flexible in terms of, if your child has a sporting event at 4 o'clock, she could do 6 or she could do a different day. So, we are really trying to work within those confines, but I don't disagree with you that it would be preferable to have somebody available during the day. It's just simply a logistics question at this point.
And I just want to say that I absolutely respect and appreciate that answer. I feel like if nothing else, being on this board and being the people sitting at this table, we're often kind of put into a position where, you hear something and you hear the complaint, but you don't listen then for the answer. So my thought that I just had reflects probably the opinion of a lot of people. So I could sit up here and I could argue with you, but I understand what you're saying. So I just encourage everyone to do that, to understand that, no, this is not ideal. We know that this is not ideal, but we're doing the best that we can in this horrible situation. And I think that we all need to continue to try to do that.
Thank you, Mrs. Stratton, for saying that. I have found myself saying, throughout the entire pandemic, and I continue to say it, we are so often forced to make the least bad choice, because none of us want to be wearing masks. None of us want to be quarantining kids. None of us want to be living through a pandemic. None of us want to have a substitute shortage, and we're not under any delusions that anything that we've been doing related to this is ideal, because this is not ideal, right? Ideal is school as it has always been. And you're right, and it is difficult, I think, sometimes for people to understand the logic of something like that. And so I appreciate the questions and the time to listen to the answer. And some people still may be unhappy. That might not be the best thing that works for their children. And I think we respect and appreciate that. And I would say one of the things that as superintendent, I'm very proud of our principals. I'm very proud of our guidance counselors. I'm very proud of our teachers and the effort that they have put into when a family has reached out to working with the individual needs of that family. I think there's sometimes this desire for a cookie cutter approach. Everybody's going to get this one idealized thing, but the reality is we've seen in this pandemic, families have different work schedules. Students have different academic needs. There's some students who do well on a computer. There's some students who do well with paper. There's some times when a family's having a quarantine and there's little siblings that are at home. Every family has a unique set of circumstances that they bring to this, and I think the more we can individualize our response and have our principals and our guidance counselors and our teachers engage with those families, and those families reciprocate the communication. I think sometimes there is this tendency, I'm dissatisfied, and so I'm going to go right to the superintendent. I'm going to go right to the board. And I think to take a pause and say, did I give my teacher the chance to fix that problem? Did I give my guidance counselor the chance to fix that problem? Did I give my principal? Certainly there's times when you did and they didn't resolve it. And as Dr. Flam said, it's appropriate to elevate it. That is why you have a hierarchical system. There are those opportunities. But I really believe that our staff wants to provide the best education to every kid that they possibly can, and they want to partner with parents when given the opportunity. And we really appreciate the tremendous number of parents who have reciprocated and have been great partners and have been very understanding through this, because it's been a tremendous stress on families as well. So I do want to take that opportunity to thank all of those families who really have been terrific partners with us for their kids.
Any other questions from the board?
Hey, I just have one more, question. It has to do with special education students. And, during the period of time with COVID that all kids were out, we were able to provide direct instruction to special education students virtually. But we're not doing that now for special ed students who are quarantined. Is that correct?
Not precisely. I'm going to let Mrs. Harris address that a little bit further in terms of what we're doing with special education students, Dr. Hunter.
So again, it's on an individualized basis, on a case-by-case situation. Again, when you talk about quarantines, please remember we have some students who are out for literally one day, because by the time we're notified about exposure, that period of quarantining has almost passed. So in that case, usually in those situations where it's just 1 or 2 or 3 days, the team then makes up that time with the student once they're back. For the longer quarantines, the teams work with families primarily through the case manager of the IEP and try to establish what the prioritized needs are for that student and then deliver services. In some cases, we've had students do their speech services via telehealth with their speech therapist. So it's just kind of an individualized approach to that. I wouldn't say, across the board, they are live streaming into direct instruction during the day or anything like that. But they're prioritizing those needs and then addressing them through the IEP. And again, it depends on the length of the quarantine.
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering whether there may be instances where some parents are kind of expecting some kind of a compensatory benefit in cases where the student maybe misses an extended amount of time due to quarantine.
That's
and
part of
isn't
making up
provided
those
direct
services.
instruction
Yep.
or receives their related services.
Yep.
And then they, for that particular reason, might claim that they weren't provided FAPE during that period of time.
Yep, that's part of making up those services and then working through the IEP teams to have those conversations if that's the situation that exists.
Thank you.
Yep.
John, if you'll permit me, I would like to see something move forward to the voting agenda. My preference would be to stop quarantining at this point. I don't know if we want to use the word suspend or whatever. I was using that earlier. That might not be the perfect term. My only concern with doing that is I really don't think that should be a 5-4 vote, especially if the new board, flips. The majority might flip on that. So I would really want that to be a. I don't know how we can do that tonight.
Well, I don't think we should be, I think we need to do the business we need to do. So, I just, we had this discussion when you guys came on 4 years ago. If we're going to deal with it, we're going to deal with it as this board. We're not going to play these games. If there's a decision that has to be made, let's just make it and move on.
And again, I would say both Mr. Japina and Mr. Ahrens, that you are not handcuffing the new board. If the new board in December says, we'd like to amend the health and safety plan to say we'll follow all guidance and mandates, they're certainly able to do that. You're not precluding them from making that decision later. Now, is that in the best interest of the community to go back and forth and decision? That may be debatable, but to Mr. Japina's point, I don't know that that's necessarily what you need to make your priority. That's obviously for the board to decide, but I don't want you to feel as though if you make a vote, the new board has no agency after that to do something different, because they absolutely do.
Well, and I hear both points, but I don't want to be the 5th vote leaving here in December for us to flip back the other way, and that's my concern. And we were elected to serve 4 years. I think the reality on the ground is there's a new board coming in, and that's what I don't want to do that. We've gone through a lot. We don't need more headlines, and that's what I'm sensitive to right now. But I would be fine moving it forward if we can't find that out this evening. I just have to vote a certain way depending on what that outcome might be, if that's how I feel at the time.
No, we're not voting tonight. We're just looking, to see if there's a majority that would want to move this forward to next week. So far, I heard 2 people, I believe, that said they would like to follow the mandates only.
Can I confirm with that my only stipulation is that we still communicate with the parents about contact?
Yeah, Dr. Herring, Mrs. Harris and I have spoken about that at some length, and we concur, and in fact, it would be our advice, although we're not, at this point prepared to make a recommendation to the board in terms of, what they do with health and safety plan. We would be happy to convene the pandemic task force between now and the voting meeting, and then provide additional feedback at the voting meeting if that would be helpful. But regardless, we would recommend that we continue the process of giving parents the notice that they were exposed, and to cut down on just the sheer workload of that, I feel like we could simply, notify families that moving forward, you'll receive the following notification, and then if you have questions, you can contact your school nurse for additional information. And I think that way it would ease up on the time that it takes the nurses to make all of those calls. But to give families the option and to know, I think is appropriate, and that's what the administration would like to do.
Thank you. I appreciate that tremendously. And I don't know if I necessarily need the task force to meet and to tell me anything more from what Mrs. Harris just said, especially when she mentioned 90% of the students were not positive. That really struck home with me. So thank you.
Mrs. Wilson, can I clarify that voting on the mask mandate and the quarantine are 2 separate issues that are moving to the?
Well, so right now, the mask mandate is going to stay in place as long as Governor Wolf has it in place. It would, in January, if we would say we are going to follow mandates only, and then the governor lifts it, it would just automatically not be in place anymore. But the board could always revisit that and in January and make a new decision.
And the quarantine is a separate issue on its own.
May I? Yeah. So, what I think what Mrs. Harris through her presentation and I, in working with her on this, is what we are proposing to the board is that if there is a desire to move away from quarantines at this point, the best mechanism to do that is to alter the language in our health and safety plan. So currently, the language in our health and safety plan says that the Exeter Township School District will follow all of the guidance of the Pennsylvania Department of Health relative to the quarantine. Right now, that's inclusive of COVID-19, inclusive of the quarantine. So if the board were to change that language and instead of saying all of the guidance, say all of the mandates, then that would immediately have the impact of have us not have mandatory quarantines. We would continue to wear masks because that continues to be a mandate through, I think the date's January 17th.
I believe
January
that
17th.
tentatively.
And that's, so on January 18th, that no longer is a mandate. So if the health and safety plan says we'll follow mandates, presuming there isn't any new mandates that happen, because that's always a distinct possibility, then masks would also be covered by the fact that it wasn't a mandate anymore. And on January 18th, they wouldn't have to be worn. However, it's always throughout the pandemic, and the governor has asserted this, within the power of the board to say, we want to institute and require masks. So there could be a separate vote. So if you change the language via this motion to say mandates only, in the short term, it would be quarantines, potentially, barring any other changes from the governor, which are always possible. It would also lift masks on January 18th because it would no longer be a mandate. But again, the board, any subsequent board always had the ability to revisit, change the language, or change the requirements. Does that make sense? I know it's complicated.
No, that makes sense.
Okay. It's a lot.
Dr. Miner, what is the language in our current plan regarding masks? Are we recommending them or are we mandating them?
We don't have any control over masks right now. So
didn't we, before the governor spoke?
We did. We did.
Was that a
Yeah.
mandate?
Yeah. So that's like Mr. Fiddler. This is like the constant world that Mrs. Harris and I have lived in, and like hour by hour, day by day, what are the rules? And even at the IU today, we were all joking that like we tend to find out at 3 o'clock on a Friday what the rules are. But so you're correct. So masks became optional over the summer, and then there was a board presentation, and we had stated that perhaps they would continue to be optional, and the board said that they wanted to have masks be mandatory. And then almost immediately, the governor said the masks were mandatory, right? So at this point, it is a mandate. Had there not been a mandate, though, our board had indicated that they wanted masks to be worn. Whether they still would be worn today, I don't know, but it became a mandate, and so it kind of negated the fact that the board had that discussion and made a recommendation, because now we don't have a choice.
I was just testing my tattered memory.
Okay. Very good. Excellent memory.
Dr. Miner, I'm generally in favor of the direction we're sort of going in, but I guess my question is, for those kids who would normally have been identified to quarantine and they come to school instead, would there be some kind of a protocol for them to be kind of evaluated each day that they come in, at the very least, their temperature taken when they walk in to school by the nurse? Does that make sense? And is that part of our plan?
It could, Dr. Hamburger. I mean, that's not innate in any of this that would happen. And to my knowledge, none of the schools who have moved away from quarantines have followed a protocol like that. Again, we certainly could put in our health and safety plan that we were going to do something like that. Here's a couple of caveats. One, temperature screenings have been shown not to be an effective way to identify whether or not someone is COVID positive at this point. I mean, I think we can all remember a time where everybody was taking your temperature for everything, and it's really not proven to be that great. It also has been proven that students often are positive and have no symptoms whatsoever. So, I always want to be cautious of giving people a false sense of security that we're doing something that's somehow going to keep their child from being exposed. And I think realistically, we're not. So I would say, you now have the ability if you choose to vaccinate any school-age child as a parent. That's within your control to do or to not do. And so you have more agency and power over your child's health than you did previously. So yeah, could we say to the nurses, you're going to check kids there? But I think that gets down a slippery slope then of kind of, is my child being targeted, and are they going to the nurse, and are they missing instruction? I think more reasonably, all of our staff, teachers, nurses, our support staff, are highly conscious of the fact that, you know, if a child is coughing, if a child has a headache, that, you know, we can take those symptoms seriously and have the nurse evaluate them. I think we would continue our vigilance in that respect. So I guess that's a long answer to say no, that wouldn't be automatic. Yes, we could add it if there was a desire to, but I'm not convinced that it would have any of the desired impacts.
I guess that, I mean, I kind of like the idea of the task force at some point, like sitting down and just sort of doing a kind of a review of where are we, kind of a state of the district in terms of, you know, our practices, and whether or not anything like that is an amendment to our health and safety plan would be a consideration.
We can certainly do that, and I think Mrs. Harris, and again, and her team of nurses have been outstanding throughout the entire pandemic, and I think the advice that they would give us in that regard would be very valuable.
So just to be clear, so if a parent, if a child is exposed, they get a call saying, hey, your kid has been exposed, are we going to give that parent the option to say, okay, well, yeah, she's been exposed, but I'm going to go ahead and let her go to school? Or are we going to have them give the option of saying, hey, I want to go ahead and have my child out for 3 days?
Again, you know, it's hypothetical at this point, but in the event that the board would make a motion and pass the motion that says that we were no longer going to follow the guidance, that we were only going to follow mandates. As soon as the board took that vote, the next day we would cease to quarantine students as a result of that. To Dr. Herring's point, we would have a notification system to say, you know, Mr. Miller, your child was exposed to a COVID positive. You do not have to take any action at this time. However, if you have questions, please contact your school nurse. Here's their number. And then it's really up to that parent to say, I would just feel more comfortable keeping my child at home. Or I want to have an awareness about the fact that my child was potentially exposed. So if I notice that they're having symptoms, I want to be more vigilant about that. You know, or, you know, I'm fine. I'm just going to have my kid go back to school. I think the potential loss of instructional time outweighs the benefits of keeping them home. And it would really become the parent's decision. If they would choose to quarantine their student, we would continue to do what we're doing in terms of, you know, providing academic supports, just like if your child has, you know, strep throat or the flu, and, you know, and you keep them home now, you know, parents, unless they're like getting to the point where it's a truancy issue, we let parents make judgments about that. We let them work with their pediatricians about what's appropriate. So it would put that, you know, back on the parent in terms of what they thought was appropriate.
Like, I know right now my son has actually been exposed twice, and he just went and got a test, and he was negative. You know, so it's a 24-hour turnaround most of the time. So, I mean, if I was a parent, I would probably go ahead and say, you know what, thanks for telling me. I'm going to go get my son tested. I'll know tomorrow. If he's okay, I'm going to go ahead and do it that way. I think that's probably a better way to look at it, you know, in that format. And it also might give some people some more incentive to get their kids vaccinated too, because they're going to keep on getting exposed every couple of weeks. You know, you never know. So you kind of look at it from both directions there. So in my opinion, I think, you know, I don't think we should wait necessarily for that process. I know there's a new board, and, you know, they probably have some aggressive ideas. There's a couple in here right now that may have some ideas on what they want to do. You know, they could always bring it up, like you were saying, in the next few weeks if they want to be that aggressive with these things. But I think hopefully they trust some of the decisions that we've made over the past, you know, 2 years of this pandemic, that we're making the right judgments in this case.
I support moving forward with the information that the vast majority of cases have come back negative.
Okay. it sounds like we have a majority that would like to move forward with it, so we could put that, we'll talk about adding that at the end of the meeting. Anybody else like to say anything about it? Okay.
All right, if there are no other questions, are there other questions? No? First of all, thank you, Mrs. Harris, and thank you, Dr. Flam. Very helpful information. We're going to stay with Dr. Flam for the next item, which is an update on the comprehensive plan.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Fiddler. As you know, in October, at the October Committee of the Whole meeting, we presented the comprehensive plan and then posted that for 28 days with the intent of coming here this evening to provide an update for you and then asking that at next week's meeting you take a vote. However, during the time that our plan was posted, PDE offered extensions to all school districts to the date for submission of their plan. And the date for Phase 2 school districts, including Exeter, is now August of 2022. So, you know, the date previously had been November 30th, and now it has been extended to August of 2022. So we'd like to veer from our original plan and take full advantage of that additional time to make some adjustments that we feel are appropriate, particularly with regard to professional development. As you know, it's very important work, and we're seeing good results from the recent sessions that we've had. Teacher feedback from our most recent in-service last week was very positive, with the overwhelming majority of teachers agreeing or strongly agreeing, based on our Likert scale, that sessions were research-based teaching pedagogy, were meaningful, were differentiated, were inclusive of both administrators and teachers, and were student-centered. These numbers were well over 90% for 4 or 5 of those questions and close to 90% for the others. So very, very strong data indicating that teachers agreed or strongly agreed in those areas. They also were provided an opportunity to give their feedback on areas that they felt they needed more support relative to the sessions that they participated in. And we'd like to build upon this work with the additional time. In addition, we met with the Professional Development Committee, and we recognized that a number of the teachers and members of that committee who were originally selected in 2018 either indicated that they were no longer interested in participating on the Professional Development Committee or were no longer serving in the capacity that they had been at that time. So, you know, we'd like to make corrections to the makeup of the committee, making sure that we have teachers from the elementary ranks, from the middle level, and from the secondary, as well as specialists and administrators. There are also a number of positions on that committee that need to be appointed, and so including local business members and such. So we'd like to work with Mr. Ricketts to identify some of those local business members possibly who would be interested in serving, and some community members as well. I'd like to set up a meeting with Mr. Fiddler to discuss some of those potential members, and then the board would need to approve those members for the committee. But fortunately, we have the time now to be able to do that and make sure that our committee is exactly what it needs to be, and to move forward with some adjustments to professional development. So instead of asking you to vote next week on our comprehensive plan, I'll ask that you allow us to postpone that vote to a later date and bring that to you in the future.
So just to clarify, Dr. Flam, for the benefit of the board, Mrs. Wilson, we would be asking the board next week to appoint the identified members so that we could, you know, immediately move forward with that professional development committee. So that would be the board action that we would be requesting instead of a vote on the plan.
So just a couple of questions. The professional development committee, is that group then going to look at the comprehensive plan and rework it, or what's their role?
That's a great question, Mr. Chapina. So I think we've talked a couple of different times about the evolution of PDE with comprehensive planning and the former strategic planning process. Those of you who served on the board a long time may remember when Act 48 first became a thing. So Act 48 is an act that requires teachers to earn a certain number of hours in order to maintain their certification. There's a similar thing called Act 45 for administrators. So when the state passed Act 48 legislation, part of that legislation was that there would be an Act 48 committee or a professional development committee comprising business leaders and it's very specific, 3 high school teachers, 3 middle school teachers. They have to be appointed by the Teachers Association, and then administrators that have to be appointed by the administrators, and then the community people that have to be appointed by the board. And what they've done is they have melded that to the comprehensive planning process so that those things cyclically happen at the same time. So the same year you have to do your comprehensive plan is the same year that you have to put forward your professional development plan. So our comprehensive plan is reflective of our district goals, 100% reading, 100% math, 100% graduation. That continues to be that plan. This is really just that piece that is the professional development that we would like to capitalize on this opportunity to have the fresh membership and just have them kind of reaffirm where we're going with professional development. I've spoken a number of times about, there being really 3 critical resources and materials themselves, time in the form of schedules, and then the people that we hire and how we train and support them. And so we feel like this opportunity to really engage with our professional development team is one that we want to take.
Okay, I have 2 more questions. Did we get any feedback from the community on the comprehensive plan?
I did not receive any feedback directly about the plan.
From nobody? Nothing?
Not to me directly.
Do we know if anybody?
Mr. Chapina, I did not either. I believe that when we had discussed it at the board meeting, you had asked for a more direct communication to the community regarding that. Dr. Flam and Mrs. Breton did, in fact, send out a direct communication about that, and we got no response as a result.
And Dr. Flem, you had mentioned that there were areas that teachers felt where they needed more support. Could you share with the board some of those areas?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had Mrs. Breton present on Parent Square, and that presentation was well received. But I think whenever there's a new product like that, teachers get a little bit anxious. So there were some teachers who responded that they'd like a little bit more information about Parent Square, had some specific questions about that. Dr. Miner did presentations on STAR data, and we had teachers asking for more of that. Those sessions were very well received. They, when Dr. Miner talks about STAR, she talks very passionately about that. She talks in very realistic terms about it, in terms of how it can be used as a benefit in the classroom and for communication with parents. And the more teachers heard about that, I think the more they're interested in learning more. So we got feedback about that. Mrs. Harris's session with our legal team about legally defensible IEPs, teachers are calling for more of that as well. They enjoyed that session, learned a lot in that session, and are asking for more information about that. A number of our teachers who participated with Mrs. McCrae on the Fountas and Pinnell sessions are asking for more time for working with their colleagues on F&P. So there are just a number of the follow-up sessions being asked for, some follow-up training to piggyback on what they received. The sessions were very well received, and they're asking for more. And as always, anytime you ask for teacher feedback, they're going to say, we need more time. So a number of teachers indicated that they just want more time as well.
Well, and I think they're learning something new, too. So, I mean, I don't think it's an unrealistic ask on their part. Does the extended time set us back on our reading goals for this year?
No, absolutely not. In fact, it's extremely encouraging. And again, I want to compliment Mrs. McCrae. I want to compliment the reading specialists, the principals and the teachers themselves. What we're seeing as we do walkthroughs is our teachers fully throwing themselves into learning all kinds of new things and really embracing that and taking these professional development opportunities, talking with their colleagues, improving their work. So I don't think it sets us back on our goals at all. In fact, I'm extremely encouraged that, although it's still a process, it takes kids a number of years to learn to read, that we may be able to attain some of those goals even more quickly than I had hoped.
Okay, thanks. Just one other question, just because it's popped into my head. Do we know when we have a Meet the Teacher night, what percentage of our community comes out and meets the teacher specifically? Do we keep those stats? Or maybe it's not Meet the Teacher. I don't know. What is the thing coming up?
Like at the beginning of the year?
Conferences?
No, the conferences. Do we know, is that a mandatory for parents to attend that, or do we know what percentage of parents are attending?
It's not mandatory for parents to attend conferences by any stretch. Over the last, I don't know if it started last year or had happened previously, but we started to schedule, via Skyward, that sort of thing. So in terms of, whether principals and teachers could collect that data and have a good sense of what percentage of parents came out for conferences, I think they could. We are offering conferences this year, primarily virtually. We found that a lot of parents appreciated not having to get a babysitter, not having to go out after dinner, those sorts of things. So we're hoping that increases engagement. Although if parents do want to come in personally, we'll make accommodations for that as well. So we're really trying to take the things that came out of the pandemic, like virtual conferences that really worked for some families, and keep those in place. Because the more parents engage with their teachers, the better. I think as a former high school teacher, the desire of parents to have conferences or their feeling that they have a need kind of wanes over time. I would imagine Dr. Flam at the junior high, you saw fewer parents, and Mr. Campbell probably sees fewer parents still as a function of age. But my guess, and I don't think there's any K4 principals here who were here last year for conferences. I see Miss Hodge out there, but she wouldn't know. Is that K4 is pretty well attended.
I would just add that last year we started to offer those conferences virtually, and the attendance increased because it was more convenient for some of the parents to attend.
So as you guys know from the sessions that we've had over the last 18 months, I can't figure out how to use Teams to save my life. So I've heard a lot of discussion in the community around.
We don't use Teams, so that's probably why you can't. It's Google Meet. The Google Teams is a whole nother.
I can't use Google Meet.
Yeah.
But I've heard this sort of rumor going around that we cheaped out and decided we weren't going to do Zoom. Can somebody just explain to me what our technology approach is?
I can do my best. I don't know if you want to knock on the door and ask Joe to come out of the closet, because I think he could do it more a service to Zoom versus Google and our decision. Thanks, Joe. Sorry to call you out.
So it really was just a decision to not continue with. We have Google Meet. We also have Microsoft Teams, believe it or not, as an option internally. It's just an easier solution. We were running into a lot of issues, and we really didn't need the extra expense of Zoom as a platform. That was really the decision-making process behind it.
So, Mr. Trina, when you say like cheaping out, are people feeling like they're not getting a level of service with that, or that they don't have access? Can you elaborate on the concern?
I really can't. It's sort of sporadic Facebook posts, but I do think that folks feel. The rumor is we didn't buy the package because there was a certain amount of licenses, and we didn't want to buy those licenses or go to a higher amount because it was too expensive or whatever. And I don't know if the question was we could use ESSER grants to support that or fund that or whatever. But I guess the question is, just because I have problems with Google Meet doesn't mean everybody does. I'm just wondering, are there issues or challenges that we've experienced with Google Meet that would preclude people from participating?
No, actually, it's a little easier of a process. There's fewer dials and controls sort of for the teachers to deal with and getting all of things in place. The real licensing, it really didn't have to do with us making a decision to, we're going to go in the cheap. Google, of course, being the trying to maximize things, included Google Meet in the tier of support that we needed. So Google no longer was free for a lot of the services that we were using. Again, during pandemic, all these vendors, including Zoom, gave us a really good sweetheart deal to get in. Meet, we had a couple of different products that we wanted to incorporate, and Google Meet was part of it. So moving to that, it was just a lot easier. The price of Zoom did increase substantially in outside of a pandemic as well. So it was really more of a maximizing the expense and making sure that we still had all the level of services, but we didn't need it as for daily instruction like we were doing in the past.
I'm sorry, I'm going to go on here. One of the things that we've also heard is that why can't a teacher just plop a camera on their desktop and go ahead and record that and then transmit it into that quarantine student's home.
Mr. Way, I think that's the last of the technical questions. I know you have to make sure our live stream works. Thank you. So I think that was something that Dr. Flam addressed in his presentation a little bit, and I'm happy to elaborate on it. When we were fully virtual, obviously it was teacher computer, kids computer. We came back. We had half days. We had a significantly reduced student population because we had a lot of parents who were fully virtual last year, and fully virtual we had dedicated teachers who are computer screen kids. Right now, our classes are full. We have 25, 26, we have a lot of kids, and that's where we want them to be in our classrooms. And I think what Dr. Flam was saying when he was talking about teachers being mobile, when we came back as part of our health and safety plan, we were told very explicitly, you have your desks in straight rows, nobody works together, teachers don't have your guided reading table because there's too much, airflow, that sort of thing. Those things are no longer, part of that specific guidance. And so and it's always this trade-off, right? What's the quality of instructional delivery versus what's, the pandemic protocols. And so we've encouraged our teachers to go back to best practices, which is circulating around the classroom, which is guided reading. So our teachers are on the move. They're not sitting down looking at a computer screen. So to say, just plop a computer screen down, the teacher is behind the computer screen, the teacher is moving around the room, so that the child who's sitting at home isn't seeing the teacher, hopefully, because the teacher is working with all of the 25 kids in the classroom. So the idea that they would just get the full experience of the classroom is just simply not the case, because the teacher is not sitting there talking into the screen. Excuse me, I got a little excited there. They're moving around the classroom and they're working with students. I think the other part of that is, we don't want anybody to ever have a day where their school experience isn't great. But if you're quarantined for 5 days and you're working with a tutor, you're getting material sent home, it's 5 days, it's 10 days. For the other 175 days that you're in a classroom, if your teacher is having to navigate 25 students, all of them who have, we know our data showed that we had a deficit in reading prior to the pandemic, and then we had the pandemic, they have learning needs. Mrs. Harris shared that we're seeing behavioral, social, emotional, psychological. Dr. Hemberger mentioned monitoring students for symptoms. Teachers have an incredible amount of things to do all of the time in the classroom. And so if they then feel like, I'm not paying attention to the student on the screen, are they taking away from the 175 days that your child is in that classroom? Are they getting a lower quality product because they're now trying to worry about the child on the screen as well as the children in the classroom? So again, to circle back around, with Mrs. Stratton, the best bad decision, we know that kids being in quarantine and quarantine instruction isn't ideal. It's one of the reasons that the board's considering moving away from the guidance. But having a teacher try to just have a screen in their classroom and say to a parent, that's your instruction, that is not quality instruction either. It just isn't. So I think that, if parents think that it will be what it was last year, where it was a fully dedicated person looking into that is not what it can be. And so we just can't recommend that that's a good way to educate students, either in the classroom or at home.
Thank you. I do have one final question, and that is, what does it take to prepare for a conference? I mean, you've got between 24 and, I don't know, 27 maybe kids, maybe even higher this year given the influx of new students. So how does that work? I mean, what's the preparation that goes into that?
Well, I think it's a tremendous amount. And again, I think it varies for an elementary teacher who's responsible for math and science and social studies and English and speaking to a parent versus a teacher who teaches, social studies and doesn't have so many things to go through per child, but maybe has more children. So I think it's a source of stress for a lot of teachers. I think, again, I always feel like people come into education by and large because they really enjoyed the school experience and it's really important to them, and they tend to be perfectionist type people. They tend to be people who put really high standards on themselves. And so sitting face to face with the parent is stressful. They want to make sure they do a good job. They want to make sure that they tell the parent what they need. So I think a lot of teachers really pour themselves into conference preparation. It starts always with, what is the narrative I need this parent to understand about how their child's being successful or not being successful, and how we're supporting them, right? So what do I, in my 20 minutes, want to show in terms of evidence? What do I want to help that parent see or understand or support that child at home? So I think every teacher probably has their own mechanism to do that. This year we are asking them to start with the STAR diagnostic because it's a consistent, objective measure that we are using, that parents know we're using, that they haven't gotten to see. So start with that, and then talk about how because of that child's strengths, you're doing this, or because of this child weaknesses in a particular area, you're doing that. So that's been added to the mix this year. And then we're also asking teachers to spend time, especially with students who are getting a lot of additional support, such as through RTI, actually having collaborative conferences where the reading specialist now joins the classroom teacher so that the parent gets to see both of those individuals, and they get to hear what's happening in the reading group and the regular instruction and what's happening in the intervention and how they're working together. So I think this year more than ever, we're asking our teachers to do even more, communicate even more effectively, collaborate with one another even more, because we're asking them to collaborate even more in their general practice. And what we hope comes out of that is that parents really understand where their child is relative to their peers, to their own starting point this year, and what specifically is happening to help their child be successful in the classroom, and how they, as partners, can help their child be successful while they're at home. So I don't know that there's any strict methodology, Mr. Japina, but I will say it's something that teachers absolutely pour themselves into, and that opportunity to have that discussion, I would really hope that every parent would try to take full advantage of it, because it's really important to be a partner in your child's education that way.
Thank you very much. I'll stop asking questions now.
Are there any other questions for Dr. Flam?
Yeah, Dr. Flam, I just wanted to let you know that the board got one comment from a resident about the comprehensive plan, and I forwarded that to you. I'm not sure if it's necessary for you to respond or not, but just wanted to make sure that you got a hold of that as well.
Last chance for questions for Dr. Flam. Dr. Flam, thank you very much for that report. The last two items on the education agenda are for, the one is an early graduation request, which I would recommend that we move ahead to next week, and approval for a field trip beyond the 60-mile radius. This is the senior high-performing music students to go to Virginia for the Virginia International Music Festival in the spring. And there's a detailed report attached to that, and I would also request that that be moved ahead to next week. And that concludes the education agenda.
All right, thank you very much. Moving on then to Mr. Ahrens and the Finance, Facilities, and Audit Committee.
Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. We'll try to keep it brief, but I want to introduce Kevin Burkus, who is an attorney with Portnoy Law Associates. They are being proposed by the administration to come in and do our delinquent tax collections for real estate property taxes. And I just want him to talk a little bit about what that relationship will be like and what the value is to the school district.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kevin Burax. I'm a managing attorney with Fort North Law Associates. And let me start by just thank you for your time. I was actually on my town school board for 8 years, so I know sometimes these meetings go late, and I'll try to be concise, but thanks for the time you're giving to the community. So I'm sure a lot of people do appreciate it. So let me just start by giving you a quick background on who we are. Fort North Law Associates is a Pennsylvania law firm. Our entire practice revolves around the collection of delinquent real estate taxes and delinquent municipal claims. That's all we do. We've been doing this work in Pennsylvania for 30 years. We have over 170 municipal clients in 25 counties.
Sir, I'm just having difficulty hearing you. I wonder, can we wipe the microphone down and have him take his mask? I can't really hear what he's saying. I don't know if we can wipe the microphone down after he speaks. I can't really hear him well.
Yeah, I think we could do something like that. Mrs. Harris, I don't know if we have some kind of a wipe to do that.
I do over in my office.
Sorry about that. It was kind of getting in my mouth a little bit too. So anyway, our entire practice is collecting delinquent municipal accounts for municipalities. We represent over 170 municipalities in 25 Pennsylvania counties. We currently represent over 50 school districts. Next year, we will be representing, I anticipate, at least 55 school districts, which is over 10% of the state. So this is all we do. And a lot of school districts just don't realize that there's options when it comes to collecting delinquent real estate taxes. Currently, your district is using the County Tax Claim Bureau to collect their taxes. And county tax claim bureaus were established under specific Pennsylvania law known as the Real Estate Tax Sale Law. And that's the law that sets the procedures for what county tax claim bureaus do. And as you may know, county tax claim bureaus have a lot of things to collect. So they're collecting essentially every school district in the county that's using them. They also collect every municipality that's using them to collect taxes. And then the county has their own taxes. So there's a lot of taxes every year that the county tax claim bureau needs to collect. And as a result of that, a large amount of taxes, the laws are set to allow them to do that with generally a relatively small staff and a relatively small budget. So the procedures that the county tax claim bureau needs to do is that after the taxes become due, by July 31st of the following year, they send out a notice that the taxes are delinquent. Pretty much a full year will pass after any action is taken after that first letter goes out. And then the teeth to the county's process is that they're going to sell your property. So in the second year, there's typically what's called an upset sale, where there's a sale of the property subject to liens. And then the third year, there's a free and clear type sale, a judicial sale, where it's sold free and clear of liens. So the teeth to that process is the sale of the property that's 2 to 3 years down the road. We proceed under a specific Pennsylvania statute that's very different from the real estate tax sale law. It's called the Municipal Claims and Tax Liens Act. We find that provides a lot more benefits for the school district in the forms of local control and the ability to sort of take action on an earlier point in the process to create some incentive to pay. And that's both positive and negative incentive. So for one thing, when we represent school districts, we're able to work more closely with each individual taxpayer to create some type of positive incentive to pay. Tax claim bureaus just don't have the authority to do something like that. So for example, we have payment plans that will offer the taxpayer to try to work out arrangements to allow them to pay a little bit over time and work with them to do that. We also have a hardship program. So for those taxpayers that have of a more serious financial or medical hardship that a typical payment plan would be too short for them to pay, we'll work with them in a hardship situation and allow them to pay over time. So we have an established program that in fact, all of our clients use that program, and it gives a little bit more flexibility to the taxpayer. We also allow taxpayers to look up their balances on our website 24/7, make payments online. So every way that we can to sort of facilitate payment for those people that want to pay but maybe need a little bit extra attention, we can work with them. We have a staff of over 70 people. We have the ability to sort of do that, follow up with payment plans, monitor payment plans, things like that. The county just doesn't have the ability to do that. And it's not a cut on the county. They're just not really made, the tax claim bureau is just not made to do that type of work. But for those people that have the ability to pay and choose not to, then the Municipal Claims and Tax Liens Act allows the school district to shift collection fees to the delinquent property owner. So in our very first letter that goes out to the delinquent property owner, we would have a list of fees and costs that could be added to the account should that taxpayer not pay. That's pretty strong incentive for people to pay. And there's always a subset of the population that generally has the ability to pay and just chooses not to. And under the real estate tax sale law that's implemented by the tax claim bureaus, there's not a lot of incentive until 2 to 3 years down the road to do something at the time of the property sale. So there's always a subset that sort of just typically sort of waits it out, and then they're always kind of 2 to 3 years delinquent because there's no real pressure to do that. Under our system and with the MCTLA, there's incentive from day one to do something because they'll see right away that there's additional cost that could be added. And as a result of that, not only do we tend to bring in a lot of money for our clients rather quickly, and I was looking actually specifically at your district. So it looks like by June 30th of this year, approximately 35% of your taxes were paid. Our firm's average by that date this year for our tax client was 46.6%. And actually from a very close neighboring district of yours in Berks County, that was over 50%. So again, we would expect to bring in money quickly as a result of the incentives that we're creating, but we also see long-term effects because the same process that people see where they have to pay their delinquent taxes more quickly because there's ramifications for not doing so, the next time they get the bill from the district after they may have paid more the first year, they're going to think twice about going delinquent if they really didn't have to. And for 89% of our school district clients, they saw this year less delinquent accounts that were turned over to our firm than from when they first hired us. So that's a pretty significant statistic. People tend to sort of now start paying on the earlier side and currently as a result of our work on the delinquent side. And one of the local districts around here, within a couple years, their delinquency rate was cut by a third as a result of our work on the delinquent side. Pretty significant number. So people realize that there's now ramifications and they have to sort of come to the table and do something. And if they need help, we're there to do that through the form of payment plans, the hardship programs, things like that. But for those people that need a little push, there's now financial incentives to do that. When we collect the money, you get it the next week. So typically a county tax claim bureau will do monthly remittances at best. We do it weekly. So we get the money, you get the money in your account the very next week. This process works. I saw it on my own school board. We actually used our firm. And the one thing that I took solace in, and I don't know, your meetings were nice and calm. Ours weren't always this calm. But the people that would come to our meetings would typically not be supporting things I was saying on that side of the table. And yet when I come to the meetings and sort of express what we're doing that we could do for the district, the people in the audience generally are in favor of it. And when I was also on the district on that side of the table, people also weren't complaining about what we're doing. And as a tax collector, sort of an easy target for people to sort of be upset with the tax collector when it comes to meetings and express displeasure to the board as to why you hired us. For my 8 years that I was on our school board, there was not one complaint for someone coming to the meeting and saying, like, what are you guys doing? So I always took, that was always, I thought, a good sign that we were working with people. And we actually, despite, again, being a tax collector, our firm actually gets thank you notes several times a year from people that we're collecting against. And those are usually for someone who went through the payment plan or hardship program. They just sort of appreciate the individual attention. And the people that answer the phones for our firm, they're trained for at least a month before they go live to answer, customer calls, taxpayer calls coming in wanting to deal with with their account. They're trained a long time because that's the front line. So I listen in on these calls. They treat the people with respect. They treat them with courtesy. Sometimes just a friendly ear to listen to their problem. Usually they're calling to vent a little bit. They'll listen to the sort of the whole situation, but then they'll get them in a situation where, all right, maybe we can get you on a payment plan. Or if it seems like a hardship program, we don't wait for that person to say, oh, this is a hardship. There's no catchword. If they don't say hardship, we're not going to mention the hardship program. If they mention a situation that seems like it's a hardship, we're going to recommend to them, you might be a candidate for the hardship program. Why don't we send you an application and you can fill it out. And the hardship application, we look at their basically their liabilities, their expenses, their income, special circumstances, and we'll make a decision on that. When it comes to our payment plans and hardship programs, you guys have the discretion to sort of set the parameters. Most of our clients just tell us to do it the way we do it because it works very well. But again, you have the potential to have input in that process. With regard to our collection process, the final step in our process would be to list a property for sale. We typically don't have to get there. So unlike the tax claim bureau where that's their teeth, this is the last step in our process. We rarely have to do it. So in 2019 and 2020, over that 2-year period, our firm was collecting about a little bit over 110,000 delinquent accounts for all of our clients throughout the state. During that same period, we had a list for sale less than 1% of those properties. And over that 2-year period, again, with about 110,000 accounts coming in, we only sold 74 properties in 2 years. So we're really not selling properties. Our goal is not to sell property. We would never list the property for sale without first coming to the board and giving you that information that this property is ready for sale, and we wouldn't sell until that's okayed. But again, it doesn't have to happen that often. So we're sort of proud of that. And what that really shows is that the front steps in our process are working. That's why, again, we were able to bring in an average this year, even with the pandemic still going on, 46.6% collected by June 30th. So that's technically money coming in that's delinquent within your current tax year. a lot of money coming in quickly. And I think the reason that that's working so well is that those incentives, the positive and negative incentives that we provide really early in that process, people realize there's ramifications for not doing something, and that there's options if they need options, and they come to the table and they work with us. And again, over time, we would hope if you were to use us that again, you would see a lot more money coming in quickly, but at the same time, less delinquent accounts over time, more people paying currently, which I know from being on the school board, it's a lot easier to budget when that money's coming in the current side versus the delinquent side. So I've spoken a lot. I know you're busy. Can I answer any questions that you might have with regard to our process and how it works?
So Kevin, you caught us on a good day. There's usually that's why we have security behind us. So you did a good. They kind of died out after a while. But I do have a question about how is, like, when we have these particular type of sheriff sales and things like that. From my understanding, you guys do own the property, and then whatever comes from that, we would get like a percentage of it. Or how does that work?
No, we don't own the property. So we're your lawyers. So we're essentially a solicitor for strictly the purpose of just collecting this taxes, nothing else.
Gotcha.
That's what we do it for. So we represent you. We would take steps to collect the debt that's owed, the delinquent taxes.
Okay.
We'll take steps to go down the road. The final step in that process is to list the property for sale. If it doesn't sell, we don't own the property. We're not owning anything. We're your lawyers for this purpose of collecting. And the district ultimately would not own the property. So we don't, unlike a bank where a bank would say, we're going to take a foreclosure sale, we're going to take back the property and then sell it to try to recoup money that's owed on our mortgage. We're not doing that. So if it doesn't sell at a particular, similar to what the tax claim would do, is we would have two sales too. We do a first sale subject to liens, and if it doesn't sell at that sale, we would then petition the court to have it sold free and clear of liens, put it up for sale again. If it didn't sell, we would try to move the sale back to another date and try it another time. If it doesn't sell, then it's in a sense similar to what's happening currently with a property and repository. So in a sense, the only way our process really doesn't work is if you have a property owner that has no interest in paying, and then you have a property that's just not sellable for some reason. But for those two things, the process will eventually work one way or another. If the person wants to keep their property, they're going to eventually pay and come to the table before it gets to sale. Or a mortgage company might come in and step in and pay. Or if necessary, we would list it for sale with board approval. And then if it's sellable, which I assume in this township, most of the property would be very sellable, someone would actually pay the property and you would get paid.
So I'm assuming your fees are based on the percentage of the collection?
The fees are based on every specific action that we take. So I hand out a handout here that goes through our process a little bit. I'll go quickly through our process just so you get it. So the first step, and actually there's a little bit in flux, so there's just been a change in the law. So typically before we'd send a notice first by certified mail informing of the delinquency, giving 30 days. And that's, in fact, this is the only charge that we would charge directly to the district. So there's a charge of $40 plus certified postage to send out that first notice of delinquency and fee shifting. That amount goes to the debt. So to the extent that there's $3,000 in taxes, we would add that $40 plus the certified postage to that. When we collect it, you get 100% back. But we also would not invoice the district to send out that first set of notice until we've collected at least cumulatively that much. So there'll be no risk for the district as to put new money out for our services. So that's the first side that goes out. There's just been a change in the law literally this month. So we're going to be now sending a notice before that's not charged to the district to just sort of by regular mail. There's a specific notice that the law is requiring, just some kind of model format notice that we're going to send out now first. So that's actually, this is the first time I've actually talked about it in public. That's a new change that's coming in the law, but it's not going to cost the district anything for that. So we do those two notices. If they don't respond, the next step is to send them a notice that a lien will be filed. That's a $175 charge for that notice. And again, all these charges would be in a resolution that was already authorized by the district, and all that information's in that very first letter. So they would see that chart of basically what these fees could be, and that's what creates a lot of incentive, and that's why I think we get so much money in right away. People see, like, the fees could add up over time. They don't want to have to pay that, so they'll pay or they'll set up a payment plan. So if they don't respond to that letter of the lien, then the next step is to file a lien against the property. When we file the lien, statutory interest under the Municipal Claims and Tax Liens Act starts to accrue 10% per annum. That's the district's money. So for a lot of our clients, especially our school district clients, they'll actually see collection rates in excess of 100% in many of the out years, and that's with the additional that interest now coming into play on top of what's owed. So it's some benefit for the time value that's being lost, but it also creates some incentive now for someone who's not paying. If interest starts to accrue at 10%, again, they're going to think twice about staying delinquent and not doing anything. If they don't respond to the lien, the next step in our process is what's called a writ of sora facias. It's similar to like a civil complaint. Sheriff comes out, knocks on their door. Again, for someone who maybe has been ducking the process at this point, if the sheriff's now handing them paperwork, again, a little bit more incentive. So everything we do creates a little bit more incentive from the step before to do something. Contact us, set up a payment plan. At no step in the process do we stop that. So there's always the payment plans, the hardship programs. They're allowed throughout the process. Obviously, the earlier you do it, you maybe save some money by not having to pay some additional fees. But again, that's always an option. If they don't respond to that writ of sora facias, eventually we would take a judgment. And then the final step, as I mentioned before, is listing the property for sheriff's sale. So each step that we take, there's a flat fee involved. So they can see ahead of time. It's not we don't take a percentage from you. We don't take a percentage from them. They can see ahead of time what the roadmap is, exactly what the fees are. And again, if they respond to that very first, well, actually the very first letter, I think it's going to be like, they're not going to really owe any money. So they can sort of negate the ability to do something if they respond right away. And that's why over time people either don't want to go through the process again, or if they do have to, they're going to contact us right away and negate the ability to have to pay anything, just maybe that $40 plus the certified postage. So that's the process. There's predictability to it, but we don't take a cut. You get 100% of your money. And let me mention one thing though. So the one caveat is that the tax claim bureau right now, that you guys use the tax claim bureau, they take a 5% commission when they collect for you guys. If you were to hire us to collect, they're still going to take their 5% commission, and it's a wash through in a sense, because you're paying it anyway. With us, I would argue that you're going to get better service, and the taxpayers are going to get better service, but you're going to have to pay it anyway. Some of the districts we represent, they choose to actually shift that cost to the delinquent taxpayer. That to save 5%, that's an option for you guys. I don't recommend or disrecommend it. It's up to you. That's a personal decision. In some areas of the state, our school district clients tend to do it more than others, but that is an option. But we mentioned, there's a question before the meeting that was mentioned to me about the county, and the reality is, like, is the county going to be, like, in a sense, offended by the school district choosing to go with a private firm rather than using county? And the reality is the county actually is going to benefit, because the same 5% they're getting now by doing work, they're going to get 5% without having to do any work. So it's a clear benefit for them to get 5% without having to do the legwork. On top of it, through my firm's procedure, we actually use county services that aren't being used currently by the county. So we use the sheriff's office, we use the profanatory's office to file things. So there's a fair amount of fees that are now coming into the county that weren't coming in prior to our process. And then on top of it, because we actually can collect faster than the county, at the end of the day, sometimes some of our actions not only enable our clients to get paid, but some of the other municipalities that are connected to that property might get paid too. So if a mortgage company will come in as a result of what we've done and pay, they'll typically not only pay our client, they might pay the county and the municipality also. So sometimes the county now will get their money quicker that's owed on their own county taxes as a result of our work for our client. So at the end of the day, the county really does benefit by us coming in multiple ways, and for you guys with regard to that 5%, it's really it doesn't matter because you're paying it anyway. So
Can you give an example of a hardship program that's used?
Sure. Well, so we have the set hardship program. So if someone were to mention something that they're either asking specifically the hardship application, or they mention something that's a hardship, we would send them an application. So the application asks for their income, their expenses, special circumstances, and we ask them to specifically say what amount of monthly payments you can make towards this obligation. So we'll look at that, and I have to say, typically when we get something like that in, most hardships are hardships. Most people who file that hardship application, it really is a hardship. Sometimes we'll see, like, the expenses might be not equal to what people would consider a hardship, but the amount they're spending on certain things might not be. So for that person, sometimes we'll push back and say, you recommended X amount per month, and maybe we would add like $100 to it and say, this seems more in line to what you should be paying, considering some of the expenses may not be considered hardships. But typically most people that do the hardship application, it really is a legitimate hardship, and we let those people typically, the amount they recommend is what they pay. So again, it's a small percentage of the population that typically has to do it. They really appreciate it. And for those people, if you were to push them towards a sale, you're adding additional fees and costs that maybe make it way harder for them to pay. And then on top of it, sometimes that property is not even worth pushing to sale. So we tend to work with people. I mean, if people want to work with us, we tend to work with them on the payment plans. Most of our payment plans, we base it on the amount that's owed, but we try to keep our payment plan structure within 6 months, because if you go extend that out too far, then that taxpayer never becomes current again. Our goal is obviously for them to become current. So that's what we typically do. But again, these are parameters that we recommend. At the end of the day, the district has the ability to sort of work with us on that. So if you were to hire us, there's a couple things that need to be done. You would sign a contract with our firm, and there'd be 2 resolutions: a resolution to shift the fees and costs to the taxpayer, and then a resolution to inform the county not to collect on the taxes that are sent to us. Another attorney with our firm, Jason Lennon, will then come in, meet with you guys, and then go over just those little particulars, like the payment plan structure and the hardship requirement, just to make sure everyone's on the same page. Because again, we represent you, and we want to do it exactly how you want to do it. So if you wanted to be a little bit more flexible on payment plans, that's fine with us too. But we would go through all those little particulars and make sure everything's on on the same page on that. But that's the way the hardship program works. They can also access it from our website. There's an application they can pull up there and send it into us. So again, we like when people call, because at the end of the day, if they're calling us, they want to do something. They're not ignoring the obligation. They want to work with us, and we're pretty good at working with the public to make sure that the thing gets paid, but at the same time they feel like they're being listened to and treated well. So that's again, we have 170 some clients across the state. We would not have that much if we didn't work with people. I mean, that's the customer service is really huge with what we do, because everyone we represent, everyone we're dealing with is a constituent. So if they're coming to you guys and complaining about our services, we wouldn't be here very long. So. But locally, we do have 3 districts that we're currently representing in Berks County, and again, over the whole state, next year we're gonna have at least 55.
Can you give me an idea of the ROI, like the return on investment? Like, for example, with $40 here, $50,
Well, you're never gonna be out. So whatever you're paying us to send that $40 plus postage, we've already collected it first before we bill you for it. So again, there's gonna be no risk that way. Believe me, that's never gonna be an issue, because we'll wait to bill you. So, and that's to be very honest, it's small change. So like, I was looking at, I gave a presentation, I gave a webinar this morning for an authorities association. So we also represent municipal authorities and collect delinquent things. And I had a sample from one of our clients. I was showing them how it works and showing how the invoice works. And I think for that authority, we were collecting it was like well in excess of like $100,000 a year. And it cost them annually for that letter, if you sort of factor in the amount that's still outstanding, it's like $700. So I mean, and for the taxes, our tax collections are even better than our municipal collections, because people tend to pay taxes before they pay like trash and sewer for whatever reason, even though it's the same priority and we proceed in the same law. Like, people pay their taxes first. You're never gonna be out of money. Like, the money's gonna come in. You'll see. Again, if the averages are right, you're gonna get 46, 50% by June 30th. Like, that's going to be like 1,000 times anything that you put out right away. I mean, it's not even going to be close. But at the end of the day, again, you get 100% of that back. So yeah, that's an easy one. So, yeah.
I'm glad to see that Tony Soprano's not going to show up at somebody's door. So I appreciate how
I left my black gloves at home. So yeah.
Can you I really have 2 things, one for the board and one for you. What impact have you seen with COVID on some of your collections?
So that's a good question. Last year, during the height of COVID, our firm did a voluntary moratorium on collections. So we actually reached out to all our clients in February and said, we just don't think it's a good idea to sort of being active collectors right now. Because we're concerned about our image too. We want to do well for our clients, but if we're doing things that the public isn't happy with, we're not going to be anywhere. So we recommended a 2 to 3 month moratorium. Everyone said, yeah, we agree. And then again, that's not really good for our firm, because we're not making really money if we're not actively collecting. But we sat back for 3 months. And then when things started going green again in the summer, we reached out to our clients, and then individually, everyone eventually started giving us the thumbs up, like, yeah, go ahead. And despite that, at the end of last year for our tax collection, it was the highest number in 2 years. So I think it was over like 65% we collected like cumulatively by the end of the year, which again exceeded the last 2 years. And I think part of the reason that was so high is that people appreciate that we worked with them, and people understood that we weren't pushing them. If people want to make voluntary payments, we would do it. If people called us for payment plans, we would still do it, but we weren't actively collecting. And I think they just appreciate that the clients were just, kind to them during that time period. And I think it reflected in the numbers. Again, I was shocked because I was doing a report and I was looking at those numbers. Yeah, it was a better number at the end of last year, better than the last 2 years, and we had a 2 to 3 month period where we didn't do any active collection. So it didn't. And again, this year, I mean, COVID's still going on, and we collected 46.6% on an average by June 30th. That's a good number. I mean, and again, that number exceeded the last 2 years. So people are paying. I mean, again, a lot of the places, most of the clients that we have, we've been there a long time. We've had school districts we've been representing 20, 30 years. Once they hire us, they don't stop using us because they see the benefits and people don't complain, and it's nice to have the money now than later. But people get the process, and that's why over time, like, a lot of our clients will just see less and less claims. So I think people understand it, but even for our new clients, we had a couple of new clients last year. Like, the numbers were good. So I didn't see. Yeah, I was for the school board. So PASBO is the School Board Business Office Association. So I think over the last year and a half, I did 4 presentations for them. They kept doing these quarterly type presentations, and they asked me to be part of it and just sort of share that types of numbers with them, just so the members can see how we're doing collection wise. Again, we're a subset, but our subset's still about 10% of the state, so it's a good indication. So I kept giving them the updates, and I think like maybe the second or third quarter last year, like, the numbers were definitely lower. But again, part of that was that moratorium. But the numbers had definitely dropped. Yet by the end of the year, they not only shot up, but they exceeded the years before. So like, I would say, for at least from what we're seeing, like, COVID has not affected collections, and some of it might be stimulus money. There's a lot of reasons why it could be. It is. I think some of it though is that people do respect the fact that we were working with them, our clients were working with them, and people took that as a good sign and wanted to work back with them. So, but the numbers were good.
Thank you. Since we're a school board, I'm going to make a literature joke here. Maybe John will be the only one who gets it. But if you get complaints, are they called Portnoy's complaints? If anybody knows Philip Roth, you'll get the joke. So the question I have for Eric or Brian is, so what are we doing here? What was the intention of bringing the firm here? I mean, I know what the intention was, but what was driving the audit committee? What were we looking to accomplish?
I was looking at an alternative. Right now, I'm looking at delinquent collections from the county. I just got last month's collections. Most of them were 2018, 2019 taxes. Hardly anything from 2020 because the county really doesn't stop or start collecting taxes to when they're getting to I guess it's called the upset sale, the second year going into the third year. So people have no incentive. Well, I've been at other districts, and I've used Portnoy at one other district, not all the other districts. What I found out is, the people at hardship, they're not found out by the county until they're going to upset sale. And now they're into 2 years delinquent, not just 1 year delinquent. And it's hard to get them out. The county's only suggestion was go get a bank loan or try to, remortgage your house or something. What I did find is delinquency actually went down. The major delinquents that I found from previous history are usually people that have the money that just don't want to spend it right now. Not having the income in costs us money. It'd be nice if there's higher interest rates because we can make money on it. But most of your taxpayers, most of your residents pay their bills, and the ones that do not pay them, usually, if it's a elderly couple or something like that, they fall through the cracks until the tax claim bureau is ready to foreclose or do an upset sale, and then they have to go out and borrow and things like that. This process actually finds them early. It finds them within the first 6 months of going into delinquency, where the county finds them in 2 years, 3 years. Now they're already over 2 years. So I'm looking at an alternative. It's the first year we'll see a high influx of cash. I'm looking at the second and third year to see a higher amount than we're used to receiving delinquency, but not. It's the first year is going to be a higher influx because once people see it, they'll pay it within the first 6 months of the first year. We'll probably double our delinquent collections that first year.
Potentially threading this out. If you can reduce your delinquencies and therefore collect more cash, you could mitigate a potential. You could take $250,000 off of a tax increase, as an example. I mean, do you see that in some of your districts in terms of, collecting more, and so therefore it just, it mitigates,
Obviously more money coming in the revenue side covers the needs for, the expense side, right? So it's pretty much that simple, right? So the more money that you can bring in that's sitting on the street, the better chance that you don't have to raise, your taxes as a result of those people that aren't paying, because that number is going to be smaller. And then hopefully again it gets smaller every year because there's less delinquents as a result of the work we're doing. So that's sort of the goal. Yeah, and it's the same thing on the municipal side, right? People, they don't want to see their sewer rates go up because there's so much delinquents. So we help the municipalities keep their rates down. So that's some of the goal. And then also it's really just a thank you for everyone who pays on time too, because they don't want to see their rates going up for those people that aren't. Most people pay on time. So it's really, it's helping the majority of people who do pay on time, yet those people that aren't paying on time have just the ability to work with them way more than the county can. So for those people to help, like, we help them. The county just can't do that. They don't, laws don't allow them to have the flexibility that we have, and it's keeping control here. I mean, this room is reach that control to work with the constituent, where when it goes to the county, you lost that control. The county commissioners decide how that works. So.
If I'm wrong, but I thought that our local tax collector had to drop double the bills or something like this year because of a decision that the township made. I thought it was a little confusing, the way the tax bills. I saw Michelle shaking her head, so she probably knows more than I do. But it was a little confusing. If I understood it, our local tax collector had to drop double the bills because of the decision the township made. Michelle, do you know?
Yeah, so the township made it that there were 2 different bills that had to be sent out. And so it was just more work in the end, and it was very confusing for people because they were getting these bills and they didn't know what they had to pay and what they didn't have to pay. But I believe it was the year prior. I don't believe it was this year. I think it started the year before that, so it's been 2 years now.
Correct me if I'm wrong, and it was also, did they drop their per capita? So at one time they had per capita and real estate, they went out at the same time, and they separated them out.
Well, thank you, Kevin. And it's Beerkiss, right?
Burex.
Burex.
Yeah, it's okay.
I'm so sorry.
I'm used to hearing it wrong, so that's
well,
fine.
I very much appreciate you coming in and sharing this with us. I would recommend that we move this forward to the voting agenda.
Mr. Aaron's, I have an announcement to make under the facilities area. Folks may remember last year we had. Oh, thank you.
Thanks everyone for their time.
Thanks very much. Folks may remember last year we were approached by a member of the Patriotic Order of the Sons of America local group, and their offer was to install a flagpole on this site of the old schoolhouse, the one-room schoolhouse that we have on the Jackson Wall Elementary property. We approved that as a board, I think, last December, and have been inquiring, what's the status of the project, and we've just learned that, I just learned today, that the project is completed, and this Thursday, which is Veterans Day, they're going to have a dedication of this flagpole, and complete with flag and lights and all that sort of thing, 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Thursday. So I'd encourage folks, if you're available, to come, and I think it's a very excellent show of local support. This project was free to the school district, and the ongoing maintenance of both the flag and the flagpole will be assumed by this organization. So I think it's something to kind of celebrate. So that's this Thursday at 2 p.m. if you can make it.
Thank you for that, Dr. Hamburger. Then it's also your turn to talk about policies.
Okay, good. We have 3 items, 3 policies on the agenda for your consideration to place on the agenda for the voting meeting. And these are 3 policies, existing policies. weapons policy, terroristic threats, and hazing that all have been modified in a very similar way. And I'm going to ask Mrs. Harris to kind of explain some of the changes that will be made to these three policies.
Thank you, Dr. Hamburger. So the additions to these three policies center around language related to threat assessment teams. Act 44, 2018 asked for school districts to develop threat assessment teams as part of a comprehensive safety and security mandate. And then Act 18 of 2019 further clarified those expectations for districts and requirements for threat assessment teams. Of course, along with that, whenever you have new requirements, you typically add language to your policies to address those requirements. And so the language added simply represents the fact that when there's a threat related to a student, whether it be a threat related to self-harm or a threat related to others, that threat, as part of our processes and a multi-layered approach that we utilize, that those threats be referred to our threat assessment teams. Just to give you a little update on the work that we're doing around our threat assessment teams. Previously in the district, there were some informal threat assessment teams happening in buildings. We're working on formalizing that process, identifying key members of threat assessment teams. Last year, I put a very large batch of staff through what we call CSTAG training, which is the recommended model for threat assessment teams and recommended forms and things like that for threat assessment teams to follow. We're formalizing procedures for that and trying to develop consistency across all of the buildings with regard to utilization of those threat assessment teams. And just one note, Dr. Hamburger, 218.1, there's a corrected copy of that policy on the agenda. There was a checkbox that was mixed. It was a typo, and part of the active content in our active policy was missing, so it's there now in the corrected part.
Thanks, Ms. Harris. Just a few things I'd just like to kind of bring to the board's attention. I think under 218.1, the weapons policy, as you mentioned, there was that early omission and then that change, so we added that portion of it. But the other thing that I see added to the policy is where the definition of weapons has been expanded to include things like electronic or electric incapacitation or a shocking device, or pellet guns, BB guns, that sort of thing, which isn't really under the, technically maybe clarified under the weapons definition. Can you explain why that was added? Because that's a local addition, right?
That is not a local addition.
I didn't see it in the draft.
Yeah, that was part of our active policy previously, okay. So we didn't add anything new. That was something that the board had already established as an addition to the definition of weapons previously.
I see. Well, it's listed in green here, so it looks like it's been added.
I wonder if it's done that way just because it wasn't part of the draft from PSBA and part of the active policy that we have, but it's not part of the draft language.
Okay. And then under the other policy, which is terroristic threats, there's another kind of provision there that I think it may or may not represent a change, but I just wanted to get your clarification on that. And it has to do with, the board requiring, prior to readmission of a student who commits a violates this policy, this terroristic threat policy, to have an evaluation by a behavioral service provider before, to make sure they don't pose a risk of coming back to school. Before they return to school, they would have to have an evaluation. I don't know whether that was part of our policy previously, but I see that maybe it has been added, and I think that was that enhancement is recommended as part of the policy service service, right?
Yeah, I'm double checking the active policy just to see, but I believe that was an addition in the draft.
Yeah, I think I looked on the active
policy. Yes, correct.
Policy,
that's an addition in the draft.
Yeah, so essentially it's just for the board's benefit. I mean, all it's saying is, I think this is the practice that we've had anyway.
It is.
Yeah, which is that, I mean, if a student violates this policy, it makes a terroristic threat before they come back to school, there's an assessment, which makes a lot of sense. That makes sure that, students are protected and that this individual student, poses no risk of harm to others.
You are correct, and that's part of the work of the threat assessment team as well, that they convene to sort of have that assessment, and then also, on top of the assessment, have a reentry plan for that student if they're returning.
Thanks, Mrs. Harris. Does any board members have any questions about the policy? Mr. Aaron?
I just had a question about the weapons policy. We, at this point, would not consider pepper spray, especially that ladies will have on their keychains or with their purses as a weapon under this policy, right?
I don't think so. I don't think that's listed in the definition. So the definition reads, shall be include but not be limited to any knife, cutting instrument, cutting tool, nunchuck, firearm, shotgun, rifle, replica of a weapon, or any other tool, instrument, or implement capable of inflicting serious bodily injury. So I think the key there is serious bodily injury.
Yeah, I think that's sort of a phrase that allows for some interpretation and maybe some consideration of almost anything. You get somebody over the head with a lamp, let's say.
Correct. A
You
stapler
know, that's not normally a
right.
weapon, but you know, if they've done bodily injury, bodily harm, it, like, in that particular context, probably would. And, I'll turn to Mr. Wattinger on this, but you know, that seems to me to be the, you know, that it's a wide and broad interpretation.
No, you're essentially right. I mean, virtually anything can eventually be a weapon in the right situation. But you know,
Yeah,
so you never.
I don't want to suggest too many examples of weapons. So.
Exactly.
But we would find in that broader definition that it would not include the characteristic of pepper spray.
Correct.
Or what the nature of what pepper spray does.
Correct.
Okay.
I have a question around the heuristic threat policy.
Sure.
This is on page 2, the second paragraph. It says superintendent or designee may report incidences involving terrorist threat to local police department. To me, that sounds like there might be some incidents where the superintendent is not required to report to local police department. Was that the intent of that statement?
That is how the policy is written, to give the superintendent, and usually it's not actually the superintendent, usually it's the superintendent's designee. Very often that's the building administrator or an assistant principal, to give them the latitude of looking at the context of the situation and making a decision on that. I'll give you an example of that. If a 5-year-old kindergarten student says, I'm going to step on your foot, right? That could be considered a threat, right? We are not going to report that to the police. So it really is incumbent upon the person who's designated to make that report, whether or not it's significant enough to be able to make that report to the police. Now, at the secondary level, they are, accustomed to having to report those kinds of incidences to police, because at that level, those kinds of incidents become much more significant and are assessed in a much different way than in my example.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So Don, I didn't compare the language in that to the PA Crimes Code, but does that reflect the PA Crimes Code?
It does. Mm-hmm. Part of PSBA's process is that they have a team of solicitors. I don't know if we've ever actually had this discussion, but they have a team of solicitors that reviews all the code, reviews all of the current regulations, both federal and state, and then that's how they develop their draft policies and push them out to us. And for the most part, here in the district, I don't know what previous practice was, Dr. Hemberger, you probably speak to that, but we do generally follow the HASBA policies as they push them out and then tweak them as necessary for our district.
So typically when we go through our links on our policies down at the bottom, click on those.
Yep.
They could either
Yep, there's some
state or
hyperlinks in
federal
there.
code.
Mm-hmm. That's what those numbers in the brackets are, generally speaking, behind certain parts of the policy.
So let me ask you a question then, because I was reviewing some policies over the weekend because I had nothing else to do. One of the things that's not active on our site is administrative regulations, ARs. Are they for public consumption, or is that just a internal document?
So generally they are internal documents, and that is something that our team is working on as we are revising policies. We're trying to bring that other half of the conversation up to date. So you have, just for general, understanding, you have your board policy, which is the governance, and then the administrative regulations are the portion that the administration follows. Those are more of the procedures for how we handle the policy internally. So different steps that we need to take. So for example, in relation to threat assessment teams, the administrative regulation would address the formation of those threat assessment teams, who the key stakeholders might be on those teams, and what the procedures are for those teams.
So that brings up a question for me then. I think last meeting Dave had asked about, I guess BCIU or somebody uses a policy where or approach where they people sort of codify that, yes, I'm aware of the policy.
Yeah. Yes.
But if the policy is really governance, shouldn't the teachers actually be signing off on administrative regulations?
No. Oh, Dr. Miner was going to get on the mic. I think we're going to say the same thing, but go ahead. I was just going to say, no, they're actually signing off that they understand what the policy is that governs them.
But if an AR is the process.
But they're administrative regs specifically because they generally refer to the process of the administrators in implementing that governance requirement, not the process of teachers. So for instance, if the policy says, this is a terrible example, but because it's mandatory, but you have to report child abuse, right?
Mhm.
Like the teachers are saying, we understand that the board requires us to report child abuse. Now the administrative regs for that might be the principal will do X, X, and X. So they are administrative in nature. So it's how the administrative team will implement the governance of the school.
Okay, so then in a root cause analysis or forensic look back, if something didn't work, the staff person will not be held accountable to the AR. That would be the administrator.
It's hard to speak in hypotheticals, in this case, and maybe Mr. Luckinger wants to weigh in from a legal standpoint. But generally speaking, the board sets the policy, and so all employees are, responsible to the policies that are applicable to them. So, for instance, a teacher is not responsible to things that pertain to facilities, policies, that sort of thing. And I think what happened at the intermediate unit was there was a recognition that there were policies that, as part of their language, said, and Dr. Hamburger, please correct me if I'm wrong, but as part of their language said, annually, people will agree that they know that this is the case. And they realized that they had no metric by which to determine whether annually people were, in fact, knowing that it was the case. Dr. Hamburger, maybe you could elaborate since you're part of that group.
Yeah, I mean, it's really easy for a policy to say, annually, so-and-so, teachers will be, informed of a policy, but it's a very different thing than to implement that policy to make sure that that actually happens. And I think the IU was very smart, in terms of taking that next step and making sure that, these policies that actually list teachers as a recipient of the policy and to understand it because it's important to them. It could be child abuse or something like that really has direct implications for how they function as protectors of students. That needs to be reinforced and sent out annually, and I think that was the intent, and I think it's a perfect vehicle for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, maybe Dr. Haller wants to weigh in a little bit because we do have a certain number of things that are required through Safe Schools, for instance, mandatory reporter training, suicide awareness, those sorts of things, and we utilize a tool to do that. And we've discussed expanding that electronic tool to cover these sorts of things. So, Dr. Haller.
So Dr. Miner did share with me the information that came from the IU, and as soon as I received that, I went and compared it to the policies that we have in Safe Schools that we require teachers to sign off. At this time, we do not require teachers to sign off yearly, but I do think that that's a conversation that perhaps we need to have. When we hire a new employee, we sign them up, we set them up with Safe Schools, give them their password, and they're required to go on and to complete certain trainings, like how to report child abuse, what their obligation is, as well as signing off on a policy such as acceptable use. What I've discovered in this role is that things were being assigned but not necessarily then checked back on. So in working with Diane, we basically started to do an internal audit. We pulled a report already as to the policies and different There's like videos that are in there that have been assigned to people that they might not even have been aware that they had to do it. So it's now going back and ensuring that all of our employees are even aware that this was assigned to them and having them go back and do that. I've already met with Sheldon, so he walked me through a little bit about what happened previously. So thank you for that information.
I'm just kind of interested, how are administrative regulations currently promulgated?
You know, I can't speak historically to the district. I don't know if the administrators around here who've been here longer have an awareness of that. There are sometimes, you know, and again, maybe Mr. Lockinger can say, I think there's sometimes like sample ARs that are put out. I've been a part of administrative teams that have gone policy by policy and, you know, determined what the intent and the implications are, that sort of thing. Mr. Lockinger, do you want to speak more broadly? Because I don't know the history here at Exeter about maybe how that's done generally.
Can I just say, Dr. Meyer, that, you know, within each policy, there's oftentimes a reference to an administrative regulation.
That is produced by PSBA as a
Yeah.
sample.
And so what PSBA offers is a service and expansion of our policy service to also include ARs. So we do have that service from them. They do provide us with sample ARs that we can consider and customize to our needs. And it you know, it should be, you know, and it's not every policy that has an AR, but those that reference an AR, administrative regulation in the policy AR is available.
Yeah, there's no set way for making them. Really, what you have to remember is the policy is the actual rule, and the AR is just how that will be implemented, how the people, you know, behind the scenes are actually implementing that policy. So the policy is the rule itself. That's what your main concern is normally going to be. If there's a certain procedure you want people to follow in enforcing or implementing that policy, that's where the ARs come into play.
So,
And I think the ARs, you know, the bigger your district is and the more people that have to get that message, the more imperative it becomes that, you know, that like right now we have one high school principal who can have a conversation with you. If you have 12 high school principals and you all want them to do something the same way, I think that's where there might be a lot of customization, that sort of thing. But generally speaking, you know, again, I don't know what Exeter has done in the past, but I think most districts start with the PSBA and then they customize from there because it's a Herculean task to handcraft, you know, all of the ARs on your own, just like it would be to create all the policies on your own.
And just sort of clarify, I mean, the board has no role in the development of ARs. That's strictly an administrative function. And so, I mean, we might be aware of it, but I mean, it's the superintendent's role to actually review and approve all the ARs.
Mrs. Harris and I have had several conversations since we both arrived here about the process that we want to follow in terms of following more tightly with our policy revisions, AR revisions, and I think, you know, we feel like starting with some sort of template, whether it be PSBA or whether it be, you know, other districts, ARs, and working from there, it's probably best to kind of do that as a mass project because I'm not sure that over the years there had been a cyclical process that had necessarily followed policy adoption here. So we probably just need to do a mass and then hopefully, you know, do more of a cyclical review following that.
my great concern with the administrative regulations, and I understand why they are separated from review by the board. It makes sense to me. Is that a lot of our policies grant a lot of administrative discretion, and when previous administrations had explained their utilization, some of it was to codify how that discretion would be used, and to me, that doesn't represent process so much.
Mr. Aaron's, I just want a point of clarification. When you say previous administrations, when what had been used, the ARs?
Previous superintendent.
But when they had developed ARs? You mean?
Yes. That part of it, that at that point, it's not process as much as it is substance in terms of how you're deciding to use your discretion. So if there is a substantial discretionary use in that process, I really think that that's something that the board should have access to under board docs. And I think
I don't think there's a question about the board having access. I think Mr. Tapina's question was the public having access. And I think Dr. Hemberger's question was about the development of those. So I don't think there's any question that the board would have access to the ARs.
So all ARs that would currently be in effect are going to be on board docs now, or would be on board docs now, because I let this go before because I never got an answer on that exact question before. So they're all on there. Okay, good. Because I'm that if an administrator was looking about how to properly follow policy, that they would have to go searching for a document that they don't know or don't know doesn't exist or does not exist. But if it's on there and if it's where everybody knows this is the central clearinghouse for all of our administrative regulations and policies, then I can have confidence that I know I'm doing everything necessary.
Yeah, I think each district takes it a little differently. I've seen districts actually, when they have the listing of all board policies, right next to it, they have a corresponding ARs right there on their website. Other districts kind of keep it, you know, a little bit more at the discretion and use of the administration, and so it's not quite as obvious for parents. So that maybe needs to be clarified here, because I think some of those documents are actually integrated into the policy. I mean, if you look at the end of a policy, occasionally you'll see an AR at the bottom of it. Other policies don't have that. So, you know, I think but this is really at the discretion of the administration, I think, in many respects. I mean, because it's their administrative regulations, not ours.
And to your point, not every policy requires an AR. It's like cut and dry. This is what the board said, and this is what you do. There's really not a lot of room for interpretation, or there's not a particular procedure that would be required for that. So, you know, there are a limited number of policies, Dr. Hemberger, to your point.
Any other policy questions, discussion? Mrs. Wilson, that's all for our committee report.
Okay. Never pressed that one before. Okay. So we are now going to move on to public comments before we move forward with these items to our voting agenda. Mr. Kaufman.
Hello. Very good. My name's Bill Kaufman. I live at 32 Longview Drive. I'm here because of an email I received, I believe it was yesterday, that said vaccinated children who are in close contact do not need to quarantine. However, unvaccinated children do. And I really want to point out just one or two really simple things, and that is, it's a known fact that if you are vaccinated, you can still get COVID. If you don't believe me, who's doing press conferences right now? It's not Jen. Why? She's fully vaxxed and has COVID. The second thing about that is the vaccine does not prevent you from spreading COVID. Studies have been going on since the vaccine's been going out, and it doesn't prevent the spread. Maybe it slows it down, maybe it doesn't. Don't know anything as far as those numbers. But the bottom line is, we have spent 2 years talking about equity and equality. I would expect that everywhere. Why would a child be treated differently when what they're being treated differently for is something that factually they are the same? They can both spread it, they can both get it. Let's cut the BS and turn around and say, if a kid has symptoms, they stay home. I've had 2 kids. I have 2 kids. Both of them have had to quarantine. One's had to quarantine twice. And the best part about it is, neither of them was sick. They got to spend 10 days at home for no reason. That costs their education. We're here to educate the kids. From the very beginning, I said I wanted the schools open. I believe every one of you were on the board except for Mr. Cadre when I sent an email saying I want the schools open. I listened to you say it was for the safety of the kids. treating the kids differently is not for the safety of the kids. They should all be treated the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufman. Dr. McCormick.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Mindy McCormick. I reside at 5000 Painted Sky Road. I just want to thank you for the opportunity to speak and continue the conversation around communication. I have to say I was a little excited about some of the things that I heard presented tonight about Parent Square. I hope that that comes to actuality the way it's intended. But I also want to bring to light how things are being communicated. For instance, I have 3 children in 3 different buildings. Often there are mass communications that come out that have information embedded about all buildings throughout the district, and it's hard to find information related particularly to your child. As well as, and I feel bad for Mrs. Hodge, who I believe is here tonight, in a mass newsletter that went out, there was an embedded thing, very small, in the middle of that newsletter that said "Coffee with Karen." How absolutely unprofessional that could be when it comes to talking about a building principal and introducing her to a community by first name. I didn't even recognize it as being the principal of the building, as well as the timing and when that was taking place and how that was communicated. I just ask that we be mindful, even with Parent Square, that we're communicating important pieces in a very efficient manner to parents that need that information. When we talk about the education plan, the comprehensive plan, I appreciated the email coming out, giving a link exactly where it was. But as someone not working in a district in education, a 56-page document written in that way is not something that's very practical to review and make any type of suggestions on. I can't say that I would understand all of that language. So it's important to communicate highlights that you think are important. Sell your community on the plan if it's important and you feel like it's the most efficient way to do it. The last thing I want to talk about is quarantine. Whether or not the decision is made to quarantine is one thing, but the education being received by students when quarantining is very important. What was expressed tonight was not provided to my child in our situation. I did reach out to the teacher. I did express the concerns and was told they would handle it when he returned to school. He does have a full IEP. He was not receiving services. I never heard from his case manager. I never heard from his speech therapist, even though we raised concerns. So I just ask that as a board and individual committees that you take the time to have conversations with the teachers and communicate to parents what they should expect. If your child's going to quarantine, if they have an IEP, you should hear from their case manager within this amount of time. Priorities will be put in place. A plan will be developed to assure your child's education. He was out for 10 days. That was extremely challenging. It was a high stress and anxiety time for him, and there was a lot he lost that he didn't get. If we knew there was access to the guidance counselor, who we already had a very strong relationship with, that could have made that process better. So I just ask that you take into consideration all of the pieces of what's being communicated so parents know what they can access to support their child. We're there, we did reach out, we did communicate, but what was communicated back was not at all what should have happened in that situation. So I just challenge all of you to engage everyone in conversation, engage teachers, engage what is realistic. But my child didn't choose to be out sick, so he shouldn't lose services that he should have had he been in school. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. McCormick. Okay, we are going to move forward with our meeting minutes from October. We're going to move forward the recommendation to modify the health and safety plan to follow mandates only, while making sure that we communicate with parents, close contacts. We are going to move forward from the comprehensive plan the identity of members of a new professional development committee. We're going to move forward early graduation requests and field trips And then also, we are going to move forward the Portnoy Law Associates for a collection of delinquent taxes. And also, first reading of 3 new policies. Okay. Does that sound good to everyone?
Okay. I'm sorry, I might have missed this. I was trying to report. Did you mention the field trip and the early graduation?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Then that concludes our meeting this week. We will be back here next Tuesday evening for our voting meeting. So thank you. Actually, the board is going to meet in executive session after this meeting tonight to discuss personnel matters. Thank you.